What's up, party people, and welcome to Countdown to Classic. This is a podcast that educates, informs, and gossips about World of Warcraft Classic. Each week we discuss the news, hot button issues, and content of the highly anticipated Classic servers. I'm your host, Josh Corbett, and this is a show where it's not my opinion on World of Warcraft that counts, but yours, if you're new to the show. Countdown to Classic goes through your expert input on everything relating to the upcoming release of World of Warcraft Classic. Today, Kevin Jordan is back to talk Shaman. We hear from our PvP expert, OhGee, for his reaction to the spellbatching news. I get slightly drunk and try to figure out what the deal is with the Classic beta with the listeners. Then we talk some speedrunning world firsts, and Dramacraft, anger management, and memory lane also make a resounding comeback. You all know the drill by now. This is a community-based podcast. So if you like what you're hearing, please join the Discord today and keep the conversations going with us all over there. Follow me on Twitter at Count2Classic with the number 2, or email me at feedback@countdowntoclassic.com. If you'd like to call into the show, make a suggestion, or just say hi. Everything you'll need is in the show notes for each episode, along with the show's Patreon link if you'd really like to help keep the show going. Or, if subscriptions aren't your thing, then you can help keep the lights on at Countdown by checking out the show's tip jar over at Ko-Fi. The show's merch store got another update this week as well, with a new really cool design with the character standing outside of a mine, fireball, ready to go, with an evil set of red eyes staring back at them from the unknown darkness, that a bunch of you might want to pick up on a t-shirt, a hoodie, or a coffee mug or what have you, so please do look to the Discord to see how that design looks and check it out on the store. But for now, we're going to begin with Vanilla WoW class designer Kevin Jordan, and I just want to remind you all to please go and support Kevin over at Twitch, where you can find him by searching for Kevin Jordan. I think he recently renamed his channel to Kevin Jordan, so that's nice and easy, simple to find. So many of you have let me know how much you're loving this ongoing series, that we're now a third of the way through, and Kevin is doing this all completely out of the kindness of his heart, taking hours and hours of his spare time away from the family to talk about vanilla World of Warcraft. So, while he may be living the dream to some of us, please do let him know his time is appreciated. Jump into his stream chat, he's there 5 days a week, and let him know that Countdown sent you. And finally, just a reminder, the Countdown to Classic Guild is recruiting. No matter what region you're playing on, head over to the Countdown to Classic Discord to get more information on our very ambitious worldwide plans for Classic. We'll be forming a serious, but not hardcore, fun, but not necessarily casual number of guilds who will tackle all content with a fun, mature perspective, and we're looking for members and potential officers. But with all that said, let's start the show with Calling Countdown. Okay, it's time for another segment of Ask Kevin, and once again, Kevin Jordan back in the house. Ladies and gentlemen, Kevin, how are you, mate?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm doing very well, and we're very excited to talk about Shamans here today, so we'll bring in our Shaman expert, Melderon. How are you, mate?
I am very happy to be here. I just want to give a big Loktar Gar before we get started.
Very good, very good. We're very excited to do this one. Once again, I will remind you all, please do Kevin a solid. Head on over to Failure Analysis over at Twitch there. Again, I promised 1 million follows, so hopefully we've gotten a little bit of the way there. Go and smash that follow button. Go and check out Kevin. He's great to hang out with over at Twitch. He talks about WoW. You know, he plays a variety of games, but generally does come back to that MMO kind of chat. Great person to hang with, to chat with, to pick his brain. If you've got any questions, get over there and follow him over at Twitch so you can support him and thank him for coming coming on the show so often and doing what he's doing with all these classes. So let's get stuck into it, guys. Let's talk about shamans. And Kevin, I'll just start you out with this one. As I do with all of the classes, talk to me about whether or not you guys over at Blizzard were happy with vanilla shamans.
Yes, for the most part. He was very distinctive. He had, with the totems, with the shocks, with the pretty wide variety of weapons he could use. He even had some fun tanking early on. So there was a lot about him that was very fulfilling and worked pretty well. So yeah, we were pretty happy with him.
Okay. Now, we recently covered druids on the show, and again, we're talking about a class here that somewhat falls under that hybrid tax umbrella, where we've got the shaman that can do the DPS, they can do the healing, and as you just mentioned, perhaps there was an intention as well to have them do at least a little bit of tanking. Now, Melderon's someone who has devoted a fair bit of time to this concept, and we'll go through all the specs in a bit of detail quite soon, but just generally, I'll ask, and I'm sure Melderon will have a follow-up question. Was there absolutely an intention to have shamans tanking content in Vanilla WoW?
Not past a certain point. So he wore mail. He had some threat mechanics, but in terms of like high-end game performing as well as the other three core tanks, no, he was not intended to do that. So some 5-man, certainly up to about Sunken Temple, maybe a little bit beyond depending on gear, but that's where a lot of people started to really feel the pinch. Beyond that, yeah, was not really intended to be a tank.
And Melderon, that's the point probably where you'd agree it starts to get a bit hard.
The leather to mail transition is very helpful, obviously, at level 40. But it does get a little bit more tricky, especially with the larger pulls, because they don't have, their AoE threat generation isn't wonderful. I mean, right. Most shaman tanks will do is they'll start with the chain lightning, and they'll rotate lower ranked shocks around other targets to kind of like almost as a sunder. So we try to spread that around. But, I will say there are tanks that do higher level content and even lower level raids. You have to be pretty geared. But there are some shaman tanks at the MC. But there are a couple tanks out there, including myself, that have tanked higher than ST. And yes, there are some, it does get a little tricky. But I guess my question is, was there ever a conversation about switching them from mail to plate like a paladin, to mirror paladins?
Yeah, plate would have been awkward. Again, I bring up thematic. They just don't look right in plate. When I think of plate, I think of the, sort of alliance, plate. We did some good horde plate as well, or made it look good on all the other horde races. But yeah, it wasn't really intended to be that. Also just, he's a big lightning guy, so plate also.
That's a good point. Yeah, it's good electricity. That's a good point.
So, yeah, and generally speaking, orcs, orc shaman, troll shaman, these were sort of the big thematics that we were working with from the previous games. And they all had, lighter armor, more tribal, looking armor, things like that. So, yeah. So
was the enhancement tree more geared towards, endgame, more of the Wind Fury two-handed build? Is, the PvP aspect of the, shaman? Is it what it became? I didn't know if was enhancement ever supposed to be an endgame DPS build, like viable?
Yes, absolutely. Enhancement was supposed to be melee up close DPS rather than, the elemental, which was the caster sitting back in the background, DPSing, shocks for support, and then, resto was the healer. So.
Okay. I've got a quick question. This is going to be my stupidest question of the interview, but were shamans ever considered to be open? Like, this is well in the early stages of development and planning I'm talking about. Were shamans ever considered to be available to Alliance as well in vanilla? And then that idea was scrapped when you decided, hey, let's have one class that's only open to sort of each faction, uniquely. Or was it always the case like, no, shamans, that's going to be the horde class?
Well, early on, we weren't even settled on there being an Alliance horde split. So. Wow. Yeah, in terms of classes, everything would have been available to everyone. So I pushed for an Alliance Horde split, and then I've always believed in ideas that create identity in the sense that we're different from the other side, we're different from you, from a race, point of view, from a class point of view, from a faction point of view. So I love things that create differences, in the various aspects of what you're playing so that you feel special, you feel unique and different from the other guy. So the talent system in general exists so that one shaman standing next to another can feel like they're different people. They're different types of shamans. So, yeah.
Thank you for pushing for the faction split, by the way, Kevin. That was
right.
We appreciate that.
Yeah, it worked out pretty well.
It turned out to be one of those things that is probably the thing that people identify with the most, you know, like it's Horde or Alliance, and then there's like 100 spots, and then it's like maybe class and race, and then some other things. But yeah, it's like Horde or Alliance is the big one. But anyway, once we had the Horde Alliance split, once we knew that, you know, orcs were going to be on one side and humans on the other, then Paladin and Shaman became really awkward in terms of crossing over. And again, I was thrilled with the fact that one faction would have access to one class and the other with the other. So I thought that was great.
Okay. Well, let's start getting through the talent trees, guys. And perhaps we'll start with, let's start with the easy one. Let's start with Resto. I think people are relatively happy with where Restoration Shaman wound up. Now, Kevin, as my dog goes nuts because we're talking about Restoration Shaman, says, when are you going to get to the elementals and the enhancement?
Right.
Now, what do you think about where Resto wound up? Were you guys pretty happy with it overall?
Yeah, I thought it was good because it was different than the Paladin. It probably wasn't different enough from Priest because, on the other side, the Paladin was really distinct for his efficient flash of light. And Shaman didn't really have that going for him in terms of how he was different from the other two. So I liked that he played very differently and felt very different than the Paladin, but he probably wasn't distinct enough from the Priest.
Even with Chain Heal, Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, he had specific mechanics, and I really liked, and we leaned into Chain Heal once we realized how well it was performing. We made that sort of his thing. But Druid was also sort of the AE healer not only in terms of like individual spells, but in terms of he could put a hot on a lot of different people and be healing sort of everyone at the same time. So Chain Heal was distinctive and it became his thing, but early on I didn't feel he was distinct enough from the other two. But it worked out eventually.
Interesting. Yeah, because I always looked at them as, this is my perspective, but I think a lot of the shamans in the shaman community we do think of ourselves very unique because of how unique Chain Heal is and being that it's a smart heal. And correct if I'm wrong, but I believe it's the only smart heal in the game.
Yeah.
That it will jump to players depending on their health. And it can also break party lines, which is huge. So I guess we feel like you did a great job. I'm speaking for myself, but most shaman feel that Chain Heal really is our claim to fame, including with our totems as well.
Yeah. And when I say like he wasn't distinctive, sometimes it does take one spell, but when I'm trying to make something, I typically want there to be a whole category of spells because obviously Flash of Light became the reason that Paladins were so great. I mean, he had other things too, but yeah, I like there to be a few more things than just the one thing that's amazing. So, like I said, we leaned into it once we realized that it was doing so well and people really identifying with it and it was doing great. But yeah, from a designer standpoint, I was like, I wish there had been a couple other things.
As far as totems are concerned, I'm wondering was there ever a point in time where you considered having totems not bound by party? As like Paladins can buff anyone in the raid, with their blessings. Was there ever a time you thought, well, let's just drop Wind Fury Totem in the middle of the melee group and all the melee benefit from it? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah. Absolutely. We considered it. That was a big back and forth. One of the big reasons I didn't want to do that was so that multiple shaman would be welcome in the raid because, it was typically easy to get the first one in, but after that, like a lot of the other buffs became, had real diminishing returns. So we had to do things to make sure that multiple shaman would be desirable. So, because we were dealing with 40 mans back then as well.
Right.
So we didn't have the luxury of like, well, there's only 27 specs and there's only 25 spots in the raid. So pretty much one of each is going to be jumped in or welcomed in, except for a couple odd specs that aren't performing. But in 40 man, it was like, well, we need multiple classes of lots of different specs. And, we didn't want people piling up on just the one thing that's performing with all the buffs taken care of. So
that's an excellent point because otherwise I guess he just the raid with one shaman and then the rest filled with priests or maybe a couple druids. Yeah, that's a good point.
Kevin, I'm wondering again generally, and maybe Melderon will get more specific with this, but just the totem system in sort of totality. Do you recall the design of that back in the day and sort of having to, or whoever might have gone like, let's do it this way. And Melderon will correct me if I'm wrong, but let's have the 4 different elements and you can only have one out at a time. And was there an early origin of that where you could have infinite amount of totems out if you so pleased? Or is this something that always sort of the idea in the end was pretty much what you'd always envisioned?
Yeah, we definitely played with popping totems down as many as you wanted.
Oh my God, that'll be amazing.
It became really spammy. And since everything was on the GCD back in the day, for the most part, that became like all you did in combat was, crap out a bunch of totems, and it would just litter the entire area. Like we also noticed in any multiplayer environment, we're all running around doing our thing. Like it only took a couple of shaman out there to like completely transform the environment into just Totemville. So that's where like the evolution of the idea came to. Well, let's break them into elemental types and let's categorize them. So there's a limit and you have to make interesting choices and things like that. So.
Kevin, the next question that's coming up from sort of the show's resident paladin expert in Thaloris is saying, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the term totem twisting, but totem twisting, blasphemy or happy accident. Do you know what totem twisting? I mean, I should just presume you do know. Yeah. Okay, great. Go for it.
Yeah. So with paladin auras, in all previous games, there was aura twisting. In previous games like EverQuest and Dark Age Camelot, things like that. The Bards did it in EverQuest. The Paladin did it in Dark Age. And it was something we were able to fix in the auras. And that was my preference. I didn't particularly like the gameplay style of twisting. But unfortunately, when it came to totems, it was much harder to do. So it was a technical limitation that we had to deal with. But had I had my way, totems would have operated much like auras in that it was down, it was affecting you. If it wasn't out, it was not affecting you. So, but because it was creating a separate object that had its own, spell attached to it, its own aura attached to it, there were some additional complications with the system. So not really a happy accident, something that we were aware of and we knew would happen. But yeah, again, if I'd had my way, if I could have waved a magic wand, it wouldn't have been a thing.
Okay.
That's interesting. Even though totem twisting, may be a happy accident, I just want to point out that it does actually breed some space for enhancement shamans to get into raids. And this is more of a min-maxy thing, but, enhancement shamans aren't really sought after in raids, because of their lowish DPS and their mana issues. However, a resto shaman in a melee group has a lot of actions per minute, has to worry about healing, has to worry about his mana, whereas an enhancement shaman can literally white hit the boss, maybe proc Nightfall, and totem twist, and really increase the DPS of that melee group using Grace of Air. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that it does breed some opportunity for enhanced shamans to get into raids.
Yeah, and that's great, and it probably would have been a reason I didn't fix that until I had a good idea of how to replace, that, because I would rather him be balanced and desirable based on other mechanics rather than, that type of thing. So
makes sense.
That would have been my goal, but yeah, again, if it's getting him in the door, I wouldn't have touched it until I had a better solution.
Now, just to go down, we've mentioned enhancement now, and Kevin, you said at the top of the episode that, the plan very much so was to have enhancement shaman rocking and rolling with the DPS in endgame content. Obviously they still do that. That's fine. People play whatever the heck you want. If you're having a good time, go for it. But the min-maxers would jump in and obviously roll their eyes and go, lol, enhancement shaman, lol, elemental shaman. But just to focus on enhancement, with that intention being there, were you guys a little bit disappointed with what wound up happening with enhancement shaman?
Yeah, absolutely. And there were several specs, especially in the classes that had healer or tank alternatives that weren't performing on the DPS side. And enhancement shaman falls into that. So the first question we always had, the most immediate concern we always had was, is this class being invited to groups? Is this class being invited to raids? And that was job one. After that, it was, is this spec, being invited? So a lot of times we had to get to the point where we were reinforcing and making sure that the spec that was performing the best actually got more love in terms of, patch cycles to make sure that the class was still being invited. So, that's why, it might have taken too long to get enhancement online because it was like, well, we got to make sure Resto is still getting that invite. So unfortunately, some of the other specs got left behind in terms of immediate play balance changes.
Now, I'm sure you probably, and this is just maybe just me, but I feel like when I say, we put out a video recently, it says, is Classic WoW balanced? And of course, a lot of people said no, like laughed at us, X, Y, and Z. But however, I believe you guys did an excellent job when you look at all three aspects of the game. Leveling PvE and PvP, I believe that there is a balance when you look at everything, right? A good example is Hunters. They get to 60 endgame quickest, but they don't have a lot of opportunity for raid spots. Maybe 1 or 2 Hunters are brought into a raid. So I guess what I'm trying to say is if you did buff enhancements damage, it would have dire implications in PvP. They're already pretty good in PvP. Now imagine if they did more damage.
Yeah, we talked about that exact question in the Druid one. And I'll say that the goal of balancing was always make sure that if we make a change, it doesn't adversely affect the other parts of the game. Mm-hmm. And there were usually great hooks, for increasing just raid damage or increasing just PvP relevant damage. And so, that it was always a holistic approach to make sure that, like you were saying, we didn't just make enhancement shamans god on the playfield to make sure as a consequence of getting them into raids. So it's something we had to pay attention to quite a bit.
Okay. Now, what I might do is move on to the elemental tree, and Melderon's just brought up a great point, obviously, in terms of balance. And, I think we often forget, people talk about all of these specs and they say, oh, why can't all the specs do something in raiding? And we often forget that, some of these specs were designed for PvP. Some of these specs were designed, for raiding and whatnot. There is supposed to be some kind of division at a certain point, and not every spec is supposed to be useful everywhere. Now, when we look at elemental, was this purely always planned to be, the PvP spec, or was there supposed to be, like enhancement, quite a bit of raid usage here, but you guys just couldn't quite get the mana pool yet, and obviously they get a lot of, crap for going out of mana so quickly in PvE environments.
Right. Yeah, the intent was that, as noble and as lofty a goal as it is, the intent was always that all 27 specs be welcome and useful in all areas of the game at all times.
Okay.
Monumental job, as it turns out. And Melderon mentioned it before, and I actually agree. A lot of it wasn't done by me. A lot of it was done by our technical designer, who did a lot of the math behind things. But he did an amazing job of keeping things relatively close when you step back and consider how big that job is. Because, like you were saying before, people don't really, they typically look at the thing that they're doing and the spec that they're playing, and that's all that matters. So they're in the tunnel. Well, I need to be better at this one thing, and they don't care about the rest of the game and how it's performing and all that. So, but the intent was always get everyone to be able to play their spec in the place that they want to play it and have it be viable and competitive and everything else. So that was the goal, and we didn't always hit the mark everywhere.
Thank you for saying that, because I think, a lot of people just pigeonhole themselves in what they want to do. But as far as the elemental tree is concerned, I think that, the mana issue is a problem, of course, and you can effectively downrank and kind of last a fight. But again, you're sacrificing your damage. But I think the biggest thing that's damning to elemental shaman is that they don't benefit from curse of elements. So there is no reduction in nature resistance. And for me, like when you go into AQ20, I just recently did that, and it's like half of your damage is mitigated. And was there ever a thought of, hey, elemental shamans are really going to have a hard time penetrating bosses or mobs and raids?
I don't remember, and it could have just been an oversight. But now that you mention it, the only thing that we weren't planning to do was any kind of holy resistance or holy penetration. The other elemental types or the other resist types were all meant to be part of the gameplay loop in terms of increasing and penetrating. So, I don't remember specifically us getting to a point where it's like, well, there's shaman are going to have trouble. But it's an excellent point.
That seems to be the most damning thing. The mana thing's an issue as well, but
Kevin, I'll just bring up this question that's popped up in Twitch chat from Lister Nosagian, who says this: why is elemental devastation a thing? That talent is so conflicted. I get it's a hybrid talent, but it's too deep in elemental to be useful for enhancement. And even with enhance, most enhancement shaman don't have enough spell crit to make it worth the 3 points. Now, I'll boil that down to a bit more of a generic question in terms of, sometimes you guys would design these classes and perhaps we'd see talents, that were sitting in one spec that players would feel belonged more to another one of the available specs. Like people say, hey, this kind of feels like an enhancement thing. Why is it sitting so far deep down in the elemental tree? Can you explain maybe a little bit about placements of talents and whether there was any back and forth about exactly where something should go, or maybe changing things over to other trees?
Yeah. So we always considered the first 10 and to some extent the first 20 to be a great place to put crossover talents in vanilla. That number went up in expansions, but because they were accessible to the guy who went and got 31 in the other tree. So that was a great place to put them. And then things beyond that point, we started to consider as purposely serving that tree, but we also like to create hooks for, the secondary specs. Because one of the things we really didn't want to occur was 51 in one tree. That was one of the things we were trying to avoid. And so, like in the example of Elemental Devastation, it has two elements to it. A lot of talents only have the one element. This one has a secondary element to sort of not force you, but encourage you to go down, enhancement with your second tree, which outside of raiding has a lot of potential usefulness. So, yeah, that's essentially the goal of how we were structuring the talent trees.
Yeah, it's an interesting way to level with Elemental Devastation. I mean, there's a lot of enhancement shamans that either go resto for that 3% extra hit, or they go into Elemental Devastation for that crit synergy with Flurry. But, the PvP shaman, there are a lot of shaman that go that way, and the PvP rewards actually will benefit your shock crits. So, and Call of Thunder would actually work synergistically as well. But it's doable. Yeah, you are lacking on spell crit, and that's the problem. But I don't know. It does work sometimes.
Okay. Now, we've been remiss, guys, and it's completely my fault. I feel like I've sort of, skipped the biggest thing for shamans, and we haven't really gone too deep on the, concept of Wind Fury. And, Kevin, if I could just sort of raise very general, as we've only got about 6 or 7 minutes left. What are your thoughts on Wind Fury in general? Did you guys sort of intend for it to be as powerful as it wound up getting? And obviously it was addressed later on, I believe. But talk to us about the thinking around the office of that particular little interesting thing for Shaman.
Wind Fury definitely fit within the concept that Shaman would have a lot of burst. That was his sort of PvP thing. Obviously with shocks and Wind Fury perks, he achieved potentially amazing burst. Later on down the road, my problems with Wind Fury became it was just overly complicated in terms of how to leverage it. Like everyone sort of figured out, oh yeah, you do Wind Fury instead of Flame Tongue Totem or, Fire Weapon. But ultimately, there were two problems with it. One is that Fire was supposed to be the DPS school. It was supposed to be the DPS element. So we tried to focus the fire, damage totem into fire. And so it had this huge competitor over in air. And air was supposed to be sort of doing different things. And on top of that, it was also just very complex, for a newer player who was trying to noodle out, well, what am I supposed to use here? Am I supposed to use Wind Fury or am I supposed to use Flame Tongue? It was very difficult from a math perspective, and they just had to be told by someone who had done the math that Wind Fury is just better. So I liked that Wind Fury did what it did, and I thought that was, again, fulfilling the kit of heavy burst. But my problems, later on just mostly became about presentation and how complex it was and things like that. So as we had an opportunity to change it, I wanted it to be less complex, easier to figure out side to side, which to use and when.
Okay.
So this is an interesting topic, Kevin. I actually did some theory crafting, using not official data, but I did some theory crafting on the weapon enhancements. And what I found was if you don't take talents into account, because talents can muddy the waters a little bit, especially with Elemental Fury, which increases the damage, crit damage bonus 100%, and Flurry, the way Wind Fury procs off Flurry sometimes. So, when I did a lot of replicates, I even did some statistics. And what I found out is that in the end, when you look over the long courses of battle, the weapon enhancements are actually balanced. Was that supposed to be?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, that's probably not the right answer. I actually think originally we wanted Flame Tongue to deliver better over time and for Wind Fury to be bursty, right? So more preferable in a PvP setting, or a short fight setting, and then Flame Tongue be, better in long fights. Again, the real problem was just that air had this DPS thing that was out of place. And so ultimately Wind Fury got in because we all loved this idea of
it's pretty amazing.
Massive burst, right? It was just super satisfying. And so once we sort of brainstormed it up, it was really hard to remove, even though it probably should have been. So we stuck with it, and yeah, it created problems down the road, but yeah, really satisfying. So.
Okay. Kevin, just a few more final questions for you. I think the theory crafters will kill me if I don't ask this one, and real quick, we'll just cover this one. Dolores pipes up and says, can you please ask Kevin if spell penetration was designed to specifically eliminate the level resistance that was otherwise unable to be mitigated by other mechanics? And obviously this pertains to both Shaman and Paladins.
So it was designed as an alternative to damage for itemization, right? And it was designed to be more powerful point for point than damage until the enemies' resistances were negated. So that was the intent of the entire thing. An alternative to just damage and a better one for anything with resistance. And we certainly were aware of the, +3 that you're fighting in most boss fights. And that was part of it, but it was also supposed to be better in terms of certain bosses or creatures that had been given additional resistances in a specific school. So. Okay.
Real quick, was there anything that you recall hitting the cutting room floor for shamans?
Yeah, we had a few ideas for totems. I probably didn't. I shouldn't say that because now I'm having trouble remembering specifically. What else? We probably sized them up for a tank at some point and then realized it was a pretty busy space, which is funny because now in hindsight, I probably would have added another tank or two spec for the game.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
So maybe that's the thing, Kevin, if I ought to double up and say, again, if you could change the game the night before release with shamans, would that be the thing? Right. Maybe make them a bit tankier?
Yeah, I've also considered disciplined priests, as I've been thinking about it over time, being a tanky spec. So there were a couple different options, maybe survival hunter, a couple different options in there, but, yeah, it's an interesting thing to play with, but yeah, this would be again for I'm going to make changes and put it on my shelf and no one's going to play it sort of.
Fair enough.
Right.
Fair enough. All right, mate. Let's wind up. Melderon, I'll give you one last chance for one quick question for Kevin before we wind up.
Sure. Maybe you can clear the air on this, Kevin. We in the theory crafting community are having a hard time with this. We actually go back and watch old PvP videos to make sure this actually works. Can Flurry proc off of crits that the additional hits Wind Fury provide?
I don't remember, honestly.
Okay, yeah, it's a weird, wonky question, but yeah.
I want to say that all of that stuff was working together as optimally as possible in order to increase damage. And that was one of the things we tweaked over time. So it might have been one of those things that started working, and then we were like, well, we can't let it be this crazy.
Right, because originally you guys had no cooldown for Wind Fury, so Wind Fury could proc off itself, and that was like insane.
Yeah. And we'd get the reports because there were so many people swinging all the time at other people, and we'd get the reports of, he just instantly killed me, right? Which is no fun for the guy being But yeah, over time we probably tweaked little elements here and there, but there was probably a time where all of that stuff was working together.
That's good.
All right, guys, I've got to run to work. Thank you so much again, Kevin and Melderon, for jumping in. Kevin, we'll see you next time for the next few calls where I think we're, almost halfway done now, which is fantastic. I can't thank you enough for taking the time out to do this.
Yeah,
Kevin, thank you for all the work you've done. Sorry.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And Melderon, thank you, mate. Thanks for popping by.
Oh, it was a pleasure. And it was a pleasure being in the same chat room with Kevin. Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, of course.
And we'll speak to you next time, Kevin. Thanks very much, mate.
All right, take care.
Recently, on my other podcast, The Cinephiles, we covered 2000's Bring It On.
He fucking sounds like the dude from The Room.
Like Tommy Wiseau.
He's Tommy Wiseau. I get you, choreographer. He good, Hey, Torrance, what you do? I'm just here with my friend. We do study.
He definitely wasn't that bad.
Oh, he's horrible. You go back and listen.
He was more cringy. He's like, hey, Tor, yeah.
Oh, hi, Torrance.
Yeah.
You're my favorite cheerleader. Oh, hi, pom-poms.
If you'd like to hear more from the Cinephiles, then please do log on to cinephiles.com. That's SINNERFILES. Or search for the Cinephiles on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. But now, let's get back to Countdown. Just before I get to this call that's coming up, I want to mention that one of the callers you'll hear is Countdown returnee Chimly, who many of you will remember from his fantastic talk on the music of vanilla World of Warcraft recently on the show. Chimly does a lot of great hard work over at his YouTube channel and is now just 25 hours of watch time short of being able to apply for monetization over there. So please, do throw him a bone and show some community support for the amazing work he does there with his Scorecraft series and much more by tuning in and pushing him over that line. Also, just a big shout out to Mr. GM. As we get stuck into this call, I first saw the little tidbit of information that we discuss in the call on his Twitter feed. So consider that source referenced and also recommended. There's plenty of good stuff over at Mr. GM's YouTube channel if you like classic and a bit of retail WoW coverage too. Anyway, let's get to the call. Okay, it's time for another Countdown to Classic call, and a bit of a unique circumstance here because I was chilling out on stream just sort of shooting the shit with a few of the guys who were kind enough to jump in voice chat and sort of chat with me over a variety of issues, including the history of Australian ads, and that was a bit of fun. But then we struck on a very interesting topic, and I asked the guys if they were cool to record this for the show, and they said absolutely. So, fair warning, I'm about 3 or 4 very well-poured scotches deep. So if I slur my words, I'm sorry, but I'm able to hold it together a little bit. But guys, we brought up a topic that I've known about for the last month, but I haven't raised on the show yet. And we've got Chimly here who raised it on stream. And I thought that's a great topic to bring up now. Even though nobody's talked about it, let's talk about it for the first time. So before we get there, I just want to say hi to everyone. Chimly, please say hi. Your return to the show after the huge music episode.
Hey man, good to be back. I really enjoyed the episode. Thanks a lot for having me then.
Mate, it was my absolute pleasure. The listeners seem to love it, and you are absolutely welcome anytime, and I'm so glad to have you back now. And we've also got another returner, Ante. How are you, mate?
G'day, how's it going?
Good, mate. Good to have you here on a Saturday night in Australia. And we've got one of my favorites yet again, Tim, TianSG. How are you, mate?
Hey, man, doing well. A little late here, but feeling good.
Good. No, now, look, guys, you're all here because, again, something that Chimly brought up that I want to tackle, and that's something that popped up on the German forums from a blue poster. And it's something that no one has talked about outside of, as I mentioned, it seems that Mr. GM brought this up on Twitter about 29 days ago, as you pointed out, Chimly, and nobody really picked up the ball and ran with it, but sort of he was all over it. And I remember commenting or liking the post back then and really not doing much with it since, but I kind of regretted it. But here we are chatting about it, and that's the potential for a WoW beta. Here we are. Summer is coming. We keep hammering it at home. It's really not that far away, and still no news of a beta, which is actually now raising the question of whether or not it's going to happen. In this post, and Chimly, I'll get you to extrapolate on this a little bit, it was insinuated that Blizzard might actually be considering not doing a beta at all. Chimly, I'll get you to talk about what was specifically said in this German post. Go for it.
Yeah, so let me just get it up right. Yeah, so the forum post on the German servers was called Beta Ja oder Nein, which is beta yes or no. And we've got a reply on that from a blue poster called that's hard to say. Toshai. Yeah, if you see this, maybe link it in the description or something. I can't pronounce that name. But the blue poster says, whether and when there will be a beta is not yet clear. If there is more information in this regard, we will contact you again. And so that is a Google translation of the original post, which is, if any German speakers are listening, they might be able to give a better translation. But ob und wann es eine Beta geben wird, steht noch nicht fest. Sollte es diesbezüglich weitere Informationen geben, werden wir uns wieder melden. So I'm not very good at reading German, but that's basically it. So from what I gather, that's like, even when a beta is given, I guess, stands not yet fast. Like that's like a really basic translation from sort of transliterating what looks like the English roots of all of those words. But yeah, it seems like the Google Translate basically is accurate enough. There's not much wiggle room in terms of, interpretation of language. You know how that works, and translations are never quite one-to-one, but it seems pretty one-to-one in this case. So yeah, whether and when there will be a beta is not yet clear. And that's 29 days ago. And we still haven't heard anything about it. And summer is getting increasingly closer. So I think it's very unlikely we're going to get one at all at this point.
And that's going to be shocking news to a lot of people. And as you say, when I first saw that, and still when you read it back to me, I focus on that word whether or not we're getting it. Are we actually going to get it all? And people would be saying Blizzard are fucking insane for not considering doing a beta. But maybe Blizzard has, bigger, different plans and just throwing us in the deep end. Ante, I'm going to throw over to you because you started going down a bit of a rabbit hole on why not doing a beta would be a horrible idea for Blizzard. Tell us what you think.
I just can't believe that they wouldn't. I mean, you're talking about importing old data into a new engine. Little things that they even explained when they did one of their panels and saying that the lighting in Westfall was purple when it should have been white. Well, I mean, you're talking about one zone that you actually crafted and made into a demo. We're talking about, 30 other zones where there could be countless little things that could be completely game breaking, let alone instances and stuff like that. Those things need to be tested, and I fail to believe that they've got 40 people in-house that they can throw together in a raid and put through Molten Core just to make sure that, the timing is right, that Ragnaros is hitting for a billion fire damage in one hitting mobs and characters and stuff, let alone server stability. I mean, I know they want to go with sharding and all these bits and bobs, but at one point, Ungarage is going to be released, and there is going to be 1,000 people sitting in Silithus. That's going to crash a server if they're not going with sharding, and if they are going with sharding, well, I'll probably be quitting.
What you mean if they're still going with sharding by the time we get to AQ?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Tim, I'll turn to you now. Now, is there any reason that you can possibly defend not having a beta, or do you agree that it's a horrible decision not to do it?
I can sort of see it from the standpoint of, in their minds, they're thinking, this is a game that's been out for a while. They're technically using 1.12 old code and just sort of trying to rebuild that from the current base. But so from that standpoint, I can kind of see it. And maybe if they're feeling rushed, I mean, it's interesting. They have been very set on it being summer. They keep saying that. And you always wonder these kind of things, if maybe there's a bit of BFA isn't doing so well. Activision maybe being like, hey guys, where are the numbers? Come on, we just laid off a ton of people. And maybe they're feeling a little pressured. Maybe they're just thinking that they aren't going to be able to get a great version out, but people are going to play anyways. And that's the best excuse I can give. The honest truth is I'm with Ante and I'm with Chimly on this. That I think a lot of people, myself included, would just want a beta just to play. But they need to test it. I mean, what Ante was bringing up was absolutely correct. We just got the news about spell batching, and they specifically told us that they're having to adjust, all the values to try to basically emulate what spell batching was like in actual vanilla. There's going to be problems.
Have you got any tinfoil at the ready? Because I've got a bit of a conspiracy theory that Charlie Bronson in chat just said recently.
Yes, I was going to get into this. Please bring it up.
Yeah, okay, so Charlie says, tinfoil hat theory. One of the private servers is the active Blizzard beta running already. And he says, I'm telling you, the more I roll this around in my head, the more it makes sense. Hashtag Blizzard private servers beta is live.
Ooh. Well, which private server?
Now, I love this theory. But on the flip side, we're talking about them using the new client and the new engine and stuff like that, which means that if they were doing it, they'd have to give it to all the people that are on that server. Yeah. We're talking about everyone using the Mango client. But on the flip side of that, just diving into that rabbit hole, what happens if there's a private beta going on right now? I mean, Asmongold has just stopped saying he's not streaming anymore. For a little bit.
Ooh, even more tinfoil.
Where is he?
Well, no, he did put a video up recently on his second channel. Basically, he had a bit of a health crisis thing. He took some, what do they call it?
But wouldn't Yeah. I mean, he has stepped away from the game for those reasons. And I see what you're saying in terms of trying to fit the jigsaw puzzle together. But, whether or not Asmongold's involved or not, and obviously he's stated his reasons for stepping away. Let's say it's sort of other people, is there a friends and family beta of WoW Classic going on that we won't sort of ever see or hear of? Then they just launch the game and say, ta-da, we tested it with our friends and family. Now here you go. But
surely there must be.
I'm skeptical, and you guys, Ante's already raised the point as well. Like, and just to extrapolate on it, when I say we, I don't mean I, because I had nothing to do with it, but you guys picked out so many issues with the demo that it would be shocking to me if they didn't do a beta, because I can only imagine the absolute waterfall list of other issues that people will pick out of the game upon its launch without a beta. Now, would you presume, let's say they do a friends and family beta, Chimly, maybe I'll turn to you, considering you think they are doing it. If they were doing a friends and family beta, I mean, not to say, who's in on that, but I'm guessing that they're not going to maybe pick up on some things that the community would at large if it was open up to a fair few more people.
Well, here's the thing. They're doing a friends and family beta almost certainly because that is their process. Can you name a game for which they haven't done a friends and family beta?
Good point.
On that grounds, I think it's likely that there is at least some iteration of that. However, let's not forget that there's been multiple and various versions of betas going on for the past, 6 years, 7 years? How long have private servers of WoW been a thing? I'm currently playing a beta server right now. Please don't tell the police. But, I'm hopping around Gold Turin on a newly created Paladin because I watched Chicago stream and got super hyped about Paladins. But, I think they're probably testing with friends and family the actual client that we're all going to be playing soon. And that's great. So they test how it works and see they can test the spell batching and see, okay, that this mechanic works here, this doesn't. But for the actual content, like going for Molten Core, all of that thing and getting to the high level leveling, they've got people all over the world doing that right now on quite close to Blizz-like servers. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think the private servers, if they're obviously not the actual Blizzard client, but they're close enough that they're definitely taking notes from it.
I think the issue when you say that, though, is a lot of the bugs that I can see coming up are literally nothing to do with the process of what's actually going to happen in, what's going to happen in the game, like, X creature cast their spell and stuff like that. I think the biggest thing that you're going to see is it's a lot of graphical kind of bugs and a lot of those kind of things. But that being said, they've got a massive pool of people that they can contact. I mean, like, obviously they're in touch with the people who ran the Nostradamus, whatever that server was.
The Nostradamus server, yeah.
I'm quite drunk right now, so I can't even talk. So, they've obviously got contact there, which means that they probably have contact with some of the high-class raiders that were from those ones. Who knows? Maybe they've invited an entire guild in. NDAs or NDAs. People don't like to break those with all the kind of drama that comes with that.
Ante, I won't give you shit for being drunk for this call because I'm sort of half deep myself, so I can't talk. But here's a really interesting point that Charlie Bronson 15 again brings up, and he's on fire in Twitch chat at the moment. Talking about a quote unquote no beta release may be wrought with flaws, but wasn't vanilla WoW's launch the same? They know their fan base will soldier through the mess and stick around. Tim, what do you reckon of that statement?
Nah, if they're believing that, I mean, they're dumber than we think they are. Because it's just, first off, I'm pretty sure vanilla had a beta, like a long beta.
Yeah.
And so, like, especially with this game, the way the community has been interacting and it's been really great. But I mean, people have been saying about sharding that, if they're sharding, they're going to quit right away. And, it's just, I don't think the community is going to have the patience for that. And like, this is a game that they're trying to emulate from 15 years ago. And I don't think people are going to have the patience for it to be exceptionally buggy and problematic. Like, people are going to have some patience, obviously. It's an MMO. It is what it is. But if it's really broken and they didn't have a beta, people are going to be going, why didn't you have a beta? Why didn't you give us a couple months at least, or a month at least, to test this stuff? I mean, talking about the demo, they had in that blue post, I forgot which one it was, but they talked about how the issue with increased health and mana regen was an issue that they thought they had solved, but it turns out they had only solved it on their own internal servers. And when they brought it out to the demo servers, it was still there, and they just didn't realize it. So there's a great example of that's the kind of thing that you would get from a beta. But if you're doing private, in-house stuff, so yeah, it'd be a really questionable move, I think. But who knows? Like I said, my conspiracy theory is that if they're not going to do it, it's because Activision is putting pressure on them to release it sooner than they want. And they would barely have time to get it out the door in a serviceable state.
Yeah, because I was thinking, we asked what the community reaction to, for example, a buggy launch would be. And I think you're dead on right that the classic community that we know now, they'd play classic, if you ask them to play it on a microwave, like they'd just do whatever you want.
The majority would do it, yes.
Yeah, well, the majority of what we consider the community, that's my point. Because when classic actually launches, we very well might be the minority very quickly.
We will.
Yeah, all the big boys are coming to stream it. Shroud, Soda Poppin', and these guys are like old school Warcraft types. They get it, but they're going to have a legion of Fortnite kiddies that no disrespect, but they aren't in the classic community now, and so I think they would react very negatively towards a buggy experience far more so than we would.
It's a great point you raised there, and I'm so glad you did. We'll go off on that little tangent for just 2 seconds because, Ante, I want to pick you up on a point that came up from that soon. But just before we get there, let's talk about, as you say, I'm pretty sure I've said this on the show before, that the people who are right now making a habit of visiting the Classic WoW subreddit, who are making a habit of posting on the official Classic forums, we are the minority. If you are listening to this podcast right now, you are in the minority of the fans or the people that will be playing Classic WoW. The majority of people who will play this game either, number one, don't know about it yet, or number two, aren't particularly interested enough to really be taking in content about it yet. So maybe, Ante, I'll turn to you. Do you think that maybe there's somewhat of a catering to that crowd base that Blizzard might be doing at the moment?
I don't think so. They seem to be pretty hell-bent on looking after the people who are the passionate ones. It just comes from every single thing that comes up. We want this way, and then they, within a week we see a blue post going, "We heard you, we're going to do it." And to be honest, I'm waiting for the blue post to come around saying, we are doing RP PvP servers because there's this massive backlash of people who want that. I don't think that the minorities are going to have as much voice. They're the guys that are kind of craft or petitioning during the crafting of the rehash of the game.
In hearing you say that, I sort of turned my mind to, it's almost like Classic WoW will be, because obviously Blizzard has intimated to us that they're listening to the community now, as in the community that is already posting about the game. It's a game that will almost be built by the community for other people to enjoy, if you know what I mean. Tim, would you somewhat agree with that?
Yeah, fully agree. I actually think that's one of the smartest things Blizzard's been doing with this, is basically lean to the fact that they have this really passionate, somewhat small community that is not, you're right, going to be the small minority. Because once it's come out, there's going to be a ton of people who play BFA now who are going to be like, let me check this out. As you guys noted, there's going to be all these streamers coming on and bringing people there. And that's the people who, if the game is good, will lock them in. But it's smart because you get to go to this community, to us, and be like, is this good, guys? Does this work? And we get to be here and be like, yeah, or nah, don't do that. But that's what makes the beta perfect. You wouldn't be like burning out the majority of people because they wouldn't be aware of it. But you do the beta, and after a little while, you start really ramping up the marketing for this. And there you go.
I just want to pick up on something that you said there, Josh. You're saying, we're kind of the ones saying building it how we want. We're not doing that. We're wanting to build it how it was. And that's the key thing, is we don't want the changes. We just literally just take the data, put it in a thing, release the game. Don't change things. We just want it how it was.
But like I say, I mean, what I'm getting at more is that they seemingly tune into what people are bitching about on the WoW Classic subreddit. They tune into what people might be making videos or podcasts about. They take that feedback on board and they make decisions accordingly. And obviously they've done massive backflips in the last couple of weeks on loot trading, and not a backflip on spell batching, but they've told us, hey, we'll give you spell batching just like you wanted it. And now everyone's going, holy shit, they listen to us. This is amazing. So it seems like there's this smaller community advocating for all of these things that we want in the game that will ultimately be enjoyed by an audience that is 10, 20, 30 times bigger than the people that are already paying attention to the game. Does that somewhat make sense?
I'd agree with that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Now, Ante, I'll keep on with you, and then Chimly, I'll turn to you after this. But one thing I can't get past is this thought that what do they have to lose by doing a beta?
I don't think they've got anything to lose, unless they're just really worried that they're showing their cards too early or something like that. But I think the people that are going to be the people that they get into the beta right now would be the people who would just look blindly past any of the issues and stuff like that, and the people that would just give back the most brutally honest opinions, and people that would pick apart everything, like that have just theory crafted every single scenario that you can possibly think of. So doing it now and having these people in, it's the perfect time before you get the hype train of like all the kind of retail players, as we like to kind of like say what they are, into the game, because it's the guys who have been playing on these servers for, the last 10 years kind of thing. They're the guys that know every encounter. They know everything about every class. Of course, they're going to find every bug.
Chimly, let me pick your brain on this interesting take. Now, we just spent the last half an hour fucking around on my stream talking about the beauty of marketing. And one thing that I'm wondering is that were Blizzard to forego this, elongated beta period, actually it doesn't even have to be elongated, whether it's 3 weeks or 3 months, that's still prime advertising or marketing time for their upcoming product. And they could essentially elect now to completely throw that away and say, we don't need advertising that will, basically say this game is coming to you. We'll just drop it on you, a la Apex Legends, and go, here you go, ta-da world. Do you think that's a mistake from a marketing perspective, or do you think it could work out?
Well, until you just said Apex Legends there, that was what was going through my mind. And yeah, it's really interesting. I think that it is an interesting case study, if you want, Apex Legends, in that it really bucked the trend. In that betas and alphas back in the day used to be absolute messes. They were broken, and that's why they existed, because they wanted to release a game in a way that it actually works. And as we know, they've laid off a lot of Q&A stuff at Blizzard, quality assurance people. So that's a whole other box of frogs, I suppose. But the interesting thing is that this new trend from Apex actually dispenses with the beta, because it became less about actually testing the game and more about just a weird prolonged advertising campaign that I suppose in some way could even diminish the hype for a game. Because if you know something's coming and it's coming for months, and you can dip into it and see it before it's really ready, peek behind the curtain, then sure, that does build awareness of the game. But it's a completely different thing to what the Apex Legends situation was, where it was just released and then suddenly everyone had this huge game that everyone was talking about, never heard about it before, and it's not, play it in 5 months. No, it's play it today, download it today, and you're in the game. And I think that creates a whole different sort of hype and excitement for the game than a slow bubbling release might. So it's different, but I think it might be a worthy strategy.
Just to piggyback, on the Apex Legends thing,
go for it.
Marketing. One of the interesting things about that, though, is they paid a lot of big streamers a lot of money to stream that for the first week it was out, and it was also free to play. So those two, so it meant that all these people watching their favorite streamers tune in and they say, "Oh, cool, what's this new game?" And then they go check it out and they're like, "Oh, it's free. Oh, yeah, I'll give that a shot." And
they don't need to pay the streamers this time, though. They've already said they're going to stream it.
That's true. But it would. I'm bringing that up because I think it would work better if they were going to do WoW Classic free to play. Yeah, which I know people don't like hearing that word. if they were going to, that marketing strategy would make more sense because free to play encourages people to just jump in and just try it out. But I mean, we already know they're tying it with a subscription. So I'm not sure that would be a good marketing strategy, but you're right. It worked brilliantly for it.
I don't actually think they will do that. I think they're going to at least announce a release date a little bit prior. At least I bloody well hope so, because I'm moving country and getting married. I need to plan my stuff, you know?
I'm in the same boat. I know, mate. Tim, let me keep going with you for a second, because just to get a little bit more niche in a way. Now, do you worry at all that if a beta weren't offered, that your class that you're intending to play, and I'm presuming that you're going to be championing again, I can't speak because I've been drinking. You're going to be championing a warlock like you were back in vanilla. Do you worry that your class won't have as much polish as it deserves going into the final product if they don't do a beta?
I mean, yeah, like there'd always be the fear, right? And that's one of the biggest issues I have with games of the last decade. Is just more and more they become basically they get released as beta. I mean, look at talking about other games that are battle royale shooters. PUBG is a great example of this. That game was $40 and I think it's still in beta technically because it's so buggy and so messed up. And like that's the kind of thing that you just worry about where, and again, to go way back to the beginning of this, where there are going to be problems because this isn't just importing the old 1.12. They're having to rebuild this essentially with a modern client. So there are going to be issues that they don't foresee. And so you always worry about that. And there are going to be people, Chimly was talking about the fact that he needs a plan for this, and most people do. People are going to be they're going to be taking their vacation days for the year or everything they've got saved up. And what if they get in the game and if it's broken in significant ways for the first week or two? That's going to really suck.
Oh, that's going to be me. I'm taking my vacation days.
Jumping in there, I think betas have changed from where they used to be. I mean, I remember when I jumped in a beta back for, I think it was Warhammer Online, that was genuinely a beta. It was there designed to find bugs. But it seems like these days, beta goes two directions. It's either, hey, you can spend all the money on the game now, and it will be in beta for a long time, or alpha in some cases. Or it's, hey, we've already finished the game. There's probably no bugs and stuff, but here's the beta weekend because we just want to use it as an advertising thing. Battlefield 5 would be a prime example of someone that did that very recently. That game was perfectly polished, but they did a beta. Why? It wasn't a server stability test. It was simply, hey, here's the game, free to play. Hello, bye.
Also, it gives them the cover of, oh no, it's a beta, so if anything does potentially go wrong, we've got some cover, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
It's a bit weak-willed.
The old, it's the sort of parachute effect, if you will. Like we've got a safe landing planned because we can just say it's a beta. But let me put this
plausible deniability.
Exactly. Let me just put this to you guys. Going back to the actual post on the German forums, are you, when I say German, I mean European forums, are you surprised that, well, actually, I should say, now, Chimly, I'll ask you, when I say European forums, do they have dedicated forums for different countries? Like this is the German forum?
I believe so. This is eu.forums.blizzard.com/DE.
Yeah. Too easy. So let me ask you this, and Chimly, I'll start with you. We'll go down the line. Now that we've discussed it at length, are you surprised that this hasn't come up in conversation, that this one kind of flew under the radar?
Yes and no. It's sort of like burying a news story by publishing it on a Friday, you know? People, for example, big headline news stories that the media doesn't necessarily want people to talk about so much. They'll publish it at the end of the day on a Friday. So everyone's like, oh, okay, cool news story. Let's go partying. Let's go clubbing. And they forget by the time Monday rolls around. I think by the Blizzard team posting about this on a German forum, that, because this game is very popular worldwide, right? We've got loads of German players of Warcraft. However, the vast majority of people are in the Anglosphere, as are all of us. And so if you publish something in a foreign language, it's just less likely to get traction. People can read the translation, but there's always an element of uncertainty in the interpretation. Less so in this case. It is pretty one-to-one, the translation. But yeah, I think purely that it is in a different language has meant that it just hasn't gained traction. I think that's the only reason.
Now, Ante, I'll ask you, do you feel that it's odd in any way that perhaps not so much that people aren't talking about this, but that more and more people aren't sort of voicing publicly, hey guys, it looks like we're not getting a beta.
I think at the moment I think more people would be voicing issues if they released if they said it's coming out this date. I think a lot of people are going, well, hold on a sec. We haven't tested. Are you guys testing this? What's going on here? At the moment, it's coming soon. I mean, like before then it was coming soon, in inverted TM effectively. So right now people are going, well, some it may only be 3 months away, but some are 3 months in itself. It may come out the final week of summer. And so that's still effectively 6 months from now. So you still do have a chunk of time to have a beta in there and for it to be okay.
Fair enough. Now, look, guys, I might ask you one by one whether you have any particular thing that you've highlighted or not. And first in best dressed on this answer, is there anything in particular that you're dying to test in a beta for World of Warcraft Classic?
I mean, like speaking about Warlock, even though I might do a mage when it comes out, but I love Warlock. Pets. I mean, pets, hunter pets, Warlock pets. Pets are always an issue. Pet pathing, pet abilities, all that stuff. Always a problem. I was like on the demo, it was a problem. And not just like because Blizzard did the thing where, all the Warlocks were complaining because their pets were disappearing at the start. I'm not talking about that. When I was playing, the pet was having a lot of issues with mob. There was one point where I killed a mob and my pet just kept aggroing to it. So as I ran away, it would just run back to the corpse and then run back to me. And it was very frustrating. But then also mobs were not aggroing my pet properly. So my pet could run through like a group of mobs and just wouldn't pull anything. So there were just clearly problems on the demo with the pets. So that's something that's a big because obviously, that works in PvP, but also pets are a very common use of exploits. I mean, don't tell anyone, but I exploited a little bit in BC using my pet. So that's something that I would really want to test and like see what sort of issues, because there will be issues.
Ante, Chimly, I'm not sure what class you guys are playing for Classic, but how about you? Anything class specific or otherwise that you would want to test in a Classic beta?
Well, not me personally, because I've never actually mastered any of the classes in the game. I'm a serial altaholic, so I think my abilities to actually test are quite limited, really. So I might not even take part in the beta, other than I guess if I was streaming it, then maybe, but I sort of want to keep myself fresh, He says whilst playing a private server, but I'm not doing any content. I'm just walking around Orgrimmar right now.
I played a mage. I think ones that would come up for me would be arcane missiles. I think there was a large discussion about that when you had
the line of sight, or
the line of sight. Is it going to fire through the walls and stuff like that? And then also clear casting. I noticed on the private server that I'm on right now, clear casting can spark off every single missile that's actually fired. I don't remember it being like that, but I'm just kind of curious. Is that how it was? I don't even remember.
I could not input on that because I have not played a mage extensively. But look, guys, it's going to be a very interesting time. Look, we're over half an hour on this call now, so I don't want to wind it out too long. But all I'm going to say is it's very, very interesting times. I think, and I'd shout out to Mr. GM for being all over this as soon as it happened. And again, nobody talked about it. But fuck it, we're late to the party, but better late than never. So this was a great chat, guys. I just want to thank you all for your participation. Let's go Chimly, mate. It's been great to have you on the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been good to be back.
And Ante, mate, you're a legend. Great talking Australian ads with you.
Yeah, it was good coming back again. A lot of fun chatting.
And Tim, mate, you're always welcome back here.
Yeah, man, it was great. Glad I was able to stay up for it. Sorry, I'm slurring my speech a little bit down too.
No, I think we've all had a few drinks or are very tired, so that's fine. Thanks, guys. We'll talk to you later.
See ya.
Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Josh here. I just want to take a quick moment to remind you that while Countdown to Classic will always be a podcast you can get for free, if you do happen to really enjoy the show and find yourself always coming back for more, then please do check out the show's Patreon page to see how you can help keep the lights on at Countdown to Classic, and even vote on show content as the show continues to bring you more and more classic WoW goodness. Alternatively, if monthly subscriptions aren't your thing, you can always visit the show's tip jar over at Ko-Fi, with that link being in the show notes and on the website too. Now, let's get back to the show. All right, time for another Countdown to Classic call with a Countdown to Classic regular, our resident PvP expert, OhGee, in the house. How are you, mate?
Doing well, Josh. Good to see you again so soon.
I know. It's funny. I've been saying to a few people, like, we've had a fair few of the same people on the show over the last few weeks, and obviously familiar voices are starting to pop up, and generally I spread people out, but I make a little bit of an exception for you, mate, because obviously we've been getting a bit of PvP news lately, and I'm more than happy to get you on here to discuss it because you know that the listeners value your opinion. And I've got to say, I feel like I can hear just a little bit of a smile on your face because there might be a bit of a victory lap going on around the OhGee household over the last day or so. Tell us about that.
I would say that is definitely true. So I'm sure a lot of people have heard the news by now. But yesterday, I was in my car at work. I'm in my car all day for work, and my phone went off, and I had a tweet at me from Nano, and my heart just absolutely stopped, and I was like, "No way, am I reading this right?" And I saw that the news that spell batching has been confirmed for Classic WoW, and I was absolutely just floored because I never in a million years expected that to go through. So pretty exciting.
It's obviously some amazing news that's come through in terms of restoring that authenticity of Classic, and, you know, we've been screaming for. And in fairness to the Classic team, they've been screaming right back at us. Guys, we've been telling you we're trying to make this authentic, so please just have a bit of faith. And then we see news like this come in, and obviously it's a great step in the right direction. But you were on the show 3.5 months ago screaming about this topic. Well, not screaming. You obviously put forth a very measured argument about why it should be in the game. But you came on the show months ago and said, hey, look, people need to look at this. The PvP community is very, very serious about this issue. Sure, there are a lot of people out there who this might have nothing to do with, and you will not notice, perhaps, whether or not it's in the game. But to a sizable niche community, it's pretty fucking important. So tell us what the PvP community has been saying in the wake of the news.
Most people are pretty happy. There are people out there that have their doubts because various private servers have had different ways of kind of implementing their own version of spell batching. So it's been a little bit different from server to server, depending on how like big that window is for each server tick. So some people have expressed some concern that, you know, they think if Blizzard goes with 400 MS server ticks, that it's just going to be a little sloppy because some private servers have had it a little bit tighter than that. But they didn't explicitly tell us how often the server will tick or 400 MS or 200 MS or whatever it might be. They just said that they used the term, I think, low priority loop, which my networking knowledge is not extensive enough to know exactly what they mean by that. But, at the end of the day, I know that what they mean is spell batching. And what I'm really the most happy about is the fact that certain mechanics that, everyone is 99% sure wouldn't even be possible without spell batching, like gouging blinks and jumping charges and stuff like that. Those are going to be doable. So I think PvP should feel a lot more like the real thing than it would have if they just used the modern engine as is. And, it's pretty exciting stuff. I would say the vast majority of people that I've talked to in the PvP scene are pretty excited.
It's funny because you say that your networking knowledge would be relatively low. I can assure you that mine would be even less so because my networking knowledge basically goes to the extent of just knowing how to spell the word, and that's about it. But what I can say is I was, a little bit surprised by this news, but I wouldn't say I was shocked. And the reason being, and again, knowing nothing about networking, I had just presumed, based on nothing, that this was a relatively easy fix. This is just inputting some numbers going, let's make the loop 400 milliseconds instead of, 5 milliseconds or whatever it is, and just put in some data. But I mean, obviously there might be a lot more to it than that, but that's why I wasn't super duper shocked. Have you been going through people's reactions on the subreddit, and what do you think of sort of the way the communities receive the news?
I did sort of scroll through the initial thread where the news got posted yesterday, and I was really, really surprised to see the amount of people that were reacting positively, because multiple times over the past several months, I've tried to kind of bring up spell batching on the Classic WoW subreddit, and I pretty much got downvoted off the page in 0.2 seconds every single time. And so I had totally given up, because, every time I tried to discuss this, it just seemed like mobs would jump on me and say, spell batching, it's nothing but a technical limitation. Why would we want to reproduce, crappy technical limitations from the past? And, even a lot of people saying, it's exploiting and, it shouldn't be part of the game, and, using it to your advantage is cheating. And I was just really dumbfounded by the amount of negativity that I was met with pretty much every time I brought it up. So to then get on the exact same Reddit and see everyone rejoicing was a little bit confusing, but I was much too busy just being incredibly happy that it went through. I know after the demo, PvP wasn't available on the demo, so I didn't actually notice myself that there wasn't spell batching in the demo. But then talking with friends in the days afterwards, a few people were mentioning it. And I was looking around at the main things with the demo that some of the bigger content creators were griping about. And it was pretty much like sort of meaningless stuff like the Legion raid frames, stuff like loot trading, which, definitely is a concern that's been taken care of now. And then the real topic of conversation at that time was sharding. The whole community were just absolutely losing their minds at the possibility of sharding. So spell batching was really something that kind of slipped through the cracks. And that was what motivated me to dedicate, I think, over half of my sort of demo review video to the topic of spell batching. And then, I asked my viewers and the PvP community to, share the video and to try and get a conversation going and talk about it. And you were cool enough to let me come on the show and talk about it. And so, I felt like I was doing everything I could to make people aware of it. And just the amount of backlash and negativity that I was met with was so staggering that I pretty much just gave up on it even being a possibility. And I guess a month or two later, Tips Out had a news update where he mentioned that a contact of his at Blizzard had told him that they were, quote, looking into a way to replicate spell batching. But I have unfortunately become a bit of a cynical guy when it comes to Blizzard over the past few years. And so I figured that was just kind of a PR statement. And I had serious doubts that it was ever actually going to happen. So I would say when I saw that spell batching had made it in the game, my level of surprise was probably about equal to my level of surprise when they first announced WoW Classic. It was just something that I had given up all hope on. I thought there was absolutely no way, they don't care. It's such a small percentage of people that it matters to, that it's not worth their time. So huge kudos to Blizzard. The Classic dev team, if they hadn't won my heart before, they have definitely won my heart now. And I have 1,000% faith in them that they are working extremely diligently to give us exactly what we want. So it's pretty exciting from the perspective of a PvP player, but it's also exciting just from the perspective of a Classic WoW fan, because this is just another sort of kernel of proof that they're really, really pouring over this to make it as authentic as possible. And I think that's what most people want. So it's exciting stuff.
Yeah. Well, that Blizzard contact that you mentioned, my interpretation had always been that would have been Yithesons, who's elaborated on this point a little bit further over at Twitter over the last 24 hours. And I
saw that he said he's known about it for a while, right?
Yeah. Well, that was sort of, I was connecting the dots going, well, Tips comes out and says, I've got a contact at Blizzard who says they're talking about it. Tips was friendly with Yithesons. Yithesons has come out on Twitter now and said, yeah, I knew about this when I was, obviously still at Blizzard. And there was that post from Gummy that got put up, sort of everywhere that people got made aware of. And that is sort of what sparked the conversation, not necessarily what convinced them to do it, but what made them look into it, as they say. And so now here we are.
Yeah, that is I'm really happy to hear that. I would like to think, in some universe that, between Gummy's post and my video, there was enough attention on the topic that Blizzard was at least aware of it. So, we, the community, definitely did our job here, even though, like I said, on the Reddit page, a lot of times it was sort of frowned upon and looked at as a non-issue. Clearly the subset of people that it did matter to, we were loud enough that we got Blizzard's attention. And like I said, what's even cooler is that once we had their attention, they actually did it. It's pretty unbelievable stuff.
For sure. I think it's absolutely a positive, nothing but a positive thing for the community. Now, tell me what you think just very quickly of, there might still be a few naysayers who just sort of say, and I've seen it around already in the comments, talk to the people who might be listening to this call going like, why are they making such a fucking big deal about this? It doesn't matter. It shouldn't be in the game. It's all bullshit. The classic team has much bigger fish to fry. Why are we fucking bothering with this one?
Well, honestly, I was sort of disappointed that the example that Blizzard used was two mages sheeping each other, because I would say that's not really the best example of how spellbatching impacts the game. But then again, I guess that's the most simple and easy to understand answer for someone that doesn't play PvP. But I mean, overall, it's a big deal because once you really get into PvP and you play it for hours and hours and hours, a huge part of being good at vanilla is sort of having a prediction heavy play style and being able to kind of read your opponent and sort of know what they're going to do next. And it's actually, I think, easier to predict people in vanilla than it is in a lot of newer expansions, just because there are less abilities in the game. And it also, I think, makes it more important to predict people in vanilla than in newer expansions. So, it's not like I'm talking about some, incredibly advanced stuff. Anybody that puts a lot of hours into PvP will, start to pick up on, okay, this is what this guy wants to do next. Okay, I'm about to damage this shaman. He's going to drop his grounding totem here because he needs to heal. Or, this rogue just took a couple steps away from me. So he's looking to dodge my Frost Nova or give himself a little bit of space to vanish my Death Coil. And that sort of prediction heavy play style is so crucial to classic PvP, and spellbatching really is just a buff to that. I think I mentioned when I came on the show and talked about it the first time that the reason that I think it's so important is because it gives you a slightly larger window to sort of successfully land a prediction, whereas with no spellbatching, when every spell is processed immediately, even if you hard predict something, it's a lot less likely that you're going to be able to cast whatever it is that you want to cast to counter it. So in terms of the flow of the game, it just would have felt much, much different. And then, like I mentioned earlier, there are some mechanics that wouldn't even exist anymore. Those are sort of few and far between. But one really easy to understand example is gouging a blink. So, let's say you're a rogue and you cheap shot a mage, and then you gouge after the cheap shot on the same server tick that he blinks. He'll actually burn his blink and it'll go on cooldown and he'll move, 12 yards, but he'll be stuck sitting in your gouge. And that's a super entry level, mage versus rogue play that you see all the time. And that would have just been completely gone from the game with no spell batching. So I dare say that down the road, we would have started to discover more and more little interactions like that didn't work anymore. And it just would have been, at the end of the day, a change. And that's really what it comes down to for me. I know that you're a no changes guy, Josh. I'm the biggest no changes guy that you'll ever find. The community said that they wanted vanilla with its quirks and imperfections, and that's what Blizzard said they were going to give us. And so even if you view spellbatching as maybe a bad thing or you're not a big fan of it, at the end of the day, it's a quirk of vanilla, and it's there and it's part of the game. And so, if you're a no changes believer, you should be happy about this. Definitely.
Yeah, well, now that we know it's going to be there and we sort of have that, as you said, they didn't explicitly say what the loop window is going to be, but now that we know it's going to be there and we guess, 400 milliseconds or whether it's, anywhere between 300 and 500 milliseconds, I don't know, but I'm guessing that what I'm going to have to do now, if I'm going to start dabbling in PvP a bit more for Classic, is, and I hope you're old enough to appreciate this reference. You and I are going to have to set up some kind of like Daniel Son and Mr. Miyagi style training session with me trying to catch flies with chopsticks so that my reaction...
Wax on.
That's it, baby. That's it. So that my reaction time is spot on so I can try and get some of this spell batching madness happening.
See, that's what's super cool though about vanilla is vanilla really is an old man's game because it's so much less about reaction time and mechanical skill compared to like, Counter-Strike or Dota or something like that. And it's way more about just awareness and knowledge and understanding how mechanics interact with each other. So I would say you're in luck, Josh. And if you just put in the time and learn how everything works, you can be as good as you want.
All right. Well, we'll keep the world waiting for that amazing YouTube video of us doing the training session. But one thing that came up that I was a little bit surprised at that I didn't know, and I'm sure you probably mentioned it on an earlier call in the show, but maybe it just didn't register with me. But I saw, our boy North tweet about this. And, much like yourself, we love North like a son here at Countdown to Classic. And he tweeted that the one thing that was surprising is that many people seem to not realize that the modern version of World of Warcraft still actually does have spell batching. It's just that the window is almost non-existent, somewhere in that sort of 5 to 10 millisecond, range. Now, I didn't know about that. And he said it's still possible to spell batch in modern. It's just obviously a freak luck thing as opposed to something that you could, actually work towards. Is that right? Is that your understanding of it?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty accurate way of putting it. I actually was talking to North earlier today. He's one of those people that is not so sure about spell batching, or at least he's not so sure about the way they're implementing it. I think he's one of those people that thinks that if it is a 400 ms window, that it could just get kind of a bit sloppy. But yeah, I believe it's still, I don't have much experience past Wrath of the Lich King, in which time the server tick rate was still pretty similar to what it was in vanilla. But from what he was saying and from what other people have told me, I think it is still possible for two people to sort of trade spells on retail. But like you said, it is kind of a freak luck thing because the tick rate on retail is so much faster than any human being's reaction time, So I don't know. It's like I said, I really love how spell batching sort of turns vanilla PvP into a little bit more of a chess match. Because, you have, it's so much more doable to make a prediction and have that 1/3 of a second, 1/4 of a second, window in which you can effectively counter somebody else's cast. So, I think that's pretty accurate. And like I said, there are people that have their doubts about it. But the one thing that I would say is if Classic comes out and they're using a 400 ms tick rate and it is sloppy and like, super awkward things are happening and it's not good, I'm sure at this point that they would make adjustments. And that's the nice thing about playing a game that's actually made by Blizzard versus playing on a private server where, because I know on Chronos 2, for example, there was a mechanic that kind of let melee have a larger range to sort of make up for like hitbox lag. And it really sort of backfired and just made melee incredibly strong in that server. And you would get gouged by rogues that were 10 yards away from you. And, if there are problems like that because of the way that Blizzard implements spell batching, I'm sure that they'll make adjustments.
Now, mate, we'll finish up on this point. I obviously don't believe what I'm about to say, but the show is all about getting the opposite perspective out there, and I want to push you a little bit on your conviction regarding spell batching. So please just regard, take everything I'm about to say with a grain of salt, but for the purposes of this statement, I mean it. Now, what would you say to this from the crowd that says the following? This was a mistake by Blizzard. They've had every opportunity to correct the mistakes of the past with Classic, and this tying themselves down to authenticity and not taking opportunities to change things in a positive fashion, such as little stupid shit like spell batching, where this was not implemented in the game by design. This was a technical deficiency that they could not correct back in the day. They have since corrected it, and to go back to the way that it was is a silly, disingenuous thing to implement for a modern crowd playing World of Warcraft Classic. It shouldn't be there, and it's fucking bullshit. What would you say to that?
Well, my honest response would be you lost me at the word change. But if I wanted to give like a proper counter argument, I would say sort of what I was saying a few minutes ago. You know, if you put yourself in the shoes of somebody who loves vanilla PvP and has played a lot of it and sort of knows the ways that spell batching affects the game and just kind of has like it's second nature to them to sort of account for it. If you put yourself in the shoes of one of those people, you know, I think anyone that is in that position would be pretty upset if they hopped on Classic and everything felt drastically different just because of an engine change and a change in the server tick rate. So there are other aspects of the game that people kind of make that argument for. For example, in vanilla, it's not possible to set a specific keybind to only target enemy players. So like on retail WoW and even in TBC and Lich King, like for arena players, it was super common to rebind your tab key to only target players. And so that way you could spam tab and you wouldn't target like totems and pets and stuff like that. But you can't do that in vanilla. And tab targeting itself also isn't great in vanilla, to be honest. Sometimes people are in range for you to be able to cast on them, but they're still too far away for you to target using tab. And so that's another one of those things that a lot of people have said should change. You know, people say, you know, why not give us the option to target enemy players, increase the range and the accuracy of tab targeting? You know, it was never intended to kind of suck the way it does in vanilla. And, you know, my counter argument to them is, well, because of the limitations of tab targeting, part of being good at vanilla is honestly having to use your mouse to target people a lot more. And, you know, stuff like camera movement, you know, stuff like that isn't really important in retail WoW, but it's part of being good at vanilla is being able to work around the game's limitations. So I would say in one sentence, working around the limitations of the existing game is kind of the definition of being good at a game. And so I view spell batching as a good thing, but to the people who view it as a limitation, that would be my response. You know, working around the limitations is literally the definition of being good at the game.
Very well said, mate. Very well said. Now, look, we'll cut it off there. We'll get you back another time if we get more PvP news. I'm predicting the next thing we're going to get, hopefully, obviously, is that PvP schedule and where it fits in the grand scheme of things. But, mate, you take your victory lap. I'm so happy for you and obviously the hardcore PvP community that this means a lot to. And we'll have to start up our training soon.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you don't mind me doing a quick plug, I think you usually don't mind this.
No, absolutely. Sorry, mate. Go for it.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, anybody that's still not totally sure about like what spell batching is or how it works, I have what is, as far as I know, the only sort of video about it that has actual video examples of gameplay. So if you go to my YouTube channel, which I hope is pretty easy to find, back in November, I uploaded a video and I actually have a few little clips in there that sort of show what spell batching can do in the game. And I think a pretty good explanation of it. So a lot of times for some people, it's a lot easier to understand something if they have visuals. And there are a lot of forum posts and stuff out there explaining spell batching, but there aren't a lot of video examples that are sort of condensed into one place. So if you're still not quite sure about it, be sure to go check that out.
And I'll absolutely condone that, guys. Everyone listening, please, if you haven't seen it already, go and watch OhGee's video. Subscribe to him on YouTube. Follow him on Twitch. Throw him all the love that you can. He's got a Discord. Get in there as well and chat with OhGee. He keeps getting invited back to this show because he is such a legendary guest. You can hear, obviously, and OhGee, I'm sorry, I don't do the backpat thing too much, but I won't get into it. But look, mate, you keep coming back for a reason because I love hearing from you. I think you're very concise in your arguments and you're very well spoken. And I just want to thank you again for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. You have a really good thing going with this podcast and I'm honored to be a part.
Thanks, man. We'll talk to you later.
Have a good one.
Now that we've heard that call from OhGee, in the spirit of the show, I do just want to provide a bit more of the other side of the coin as we like to do here when we can on Countdown. So I'm just going to read you the following feedback from frequent contributor to the show, Minoru, who says the following about spell batching. After the news of spell batching in Classic being tuned to simulate how it was in Vanilla, it was interesting to see the response. People rejoiced, as they should. To an extent. It's right to celebrate for the sake of authenticity, but to those who celebrate claiming that classic PvP will be greater for this change are taking a rather puzzling stance. Had this news reached the ears of the players during actual vanilla, it would be confusion, bewilderment, and hostility. I'm all for authenticity, but have the people who played vanilla World of Warcraft forgotten how we actually felt back then? Back in those vanilla days, spell batching was pretty much an unknown quantity. The player base as a whole made the assumption that when you hit an ability, it went off. If someone else hit an ability after you, that ability would go off after yours. It only makes sense after all. A happens first, then B. Anything that violates this would often be attributed to lag or a bug in the system. Far too often, rogues would lament that Vanish was broken. You'd hit Vanish and you'd be in enhanced stealth for a moment, but be pushed out of it right afterwards. The ability did not work as expected. People cried out, "I was in stealth! Vanish is bugged!" And to their credit, Vanish was bugged for a time. Then Blizzard fixed it. But the player base wasn't convinced. Still, rogues found themselves hitting Vanish, and yet they were being pulled out of stealth. While it's impossible to time travel and see for ourselves for sure, these complaints on old forums about a still broken Vanish are quite likely victims of a misunderstood spell batch. We didn't know its name. We didn't know its effects. We didn't know how it worked, but we knew there was something out there that was messing up the way we were playing. Things were happening out of order, making things happen that shouldn't have been. The mage that blinked before a gouge but was gouged anyway. The rogue that kicked a warlock's fear but got feared anyway. These complaints were put out there, but without a cohesive direction to put them, and with Blizzard unable to fix it anyway with their current hardware, it was left completely ignored. After all, a few months ago, barely any of us even knew or cared about spell batching. When the issue was raised up, it was met with a collective, huh? That's why it's so odd to see it celebrated so. Imagine the stereotypical Western movie. Two outlaws standing at odds with each other in the middle of town, ready to shoot each other the moment it's high noon. Assuming movie magic and that they're good shots, the quickest draw wins and the slower guy goes down. But with spell batching, the quickest draw's bullet doesn't get to go off until the second, slower guy's draw goes off too. So they both go down. It didn't matter who was the quicker draw. Why celebrate a system that rewards the second, slower reaction? Shouldn't the first person to act get the initiative? I feel the people who justify vanilla spell batching as better, essential, more nuanced, and more strategic are reaching for reasons. Perhaps they only said that to get Blizzard to take action and get vanilla spell batching into Classic. Maybe. We should celebrate spell batching as it was in vanilla for authenticity's sake, but just keep in mind the historical context. The actual vanilla players at the time absolutely hated it. They just couldn't put a name to it. And I just want to say very well said, Minoru, and we really do try to obviously put both arguments before everyone listening. So we've had OhGee, who is absolutely pro spell batching and rejoicing for the PvP community, and obviously this is something to consider from Minoru as well on the other side of the coin, people who maybe should not be or aren't as jazzed about the news. But good to hear from both, so thanks for that, Minoru. Alright, it's time for another countdown to Classic call, and we've got two people on the line that I have been really busting to talk to for a little while now. We've been talking about this call for a few weeks, and we had to hold off till now, and I'm really excited to get my teeth stuck into this one. We've got Alenya on the line, who a few of you may have seen hanging around the Countdown to Classic Discord, and her friend Umbra. Now, these two are sort of great people to talk to for this particular topic because we're talking speed leveling, and we've obviously already talked on the show with Joanna, the, famous world record holder of the 0 to 60 run in vanilla. And a lot of people are going to have their eye on that prize once Classic launches, wanting to be that first person to hit 60. And I've got two people on the line who are not only coming for that crown, but have also devised a leveling guide of their own to obviously go up against that of Joanna's. And there'll be, you know, a little bit of a difference between theirs and Joanna's guide. And I know he's working on some new stuff too, but let me let you guys say hi. Alenya, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. Hi. Thanks for having me here.
It's an absolute pleasure. And Umbra, how are you, mate?
Hey, doing really well. Glad to be here.
Fantastic. It's great to have you guys here. Now, Alenya, I'll throw it off to you to kick off. I've set it up as best I can, but I'm sure you've got a million more things to add to that. How can you best explain what the two of you have been doing with your work?
Probably the easiest way to explain it is that we've basically had no life for the last 2 years putting this guide together. That's probably fair to say, isn't it, Umbra?
Yeah, it's been a lot. A lot of play, a lot of planning, combination of things.
Okay, so how 2 years ago, like how did this come up between the two of you? Who suggested it?
Well, actually, it hasn't been the two of us together for the last 2 years. We actually both started working on practicing our speed running and starting to put together a guide separately. I think from memory, I ran into a comment that Amber had made, making a little bit of a shout out on an unrelated YouTube video, looking for someone that might be interested in doing a bit more work with him on the leveling side. And I, called out to him and, we've been tormenting each other.
Fantastic. Now, you guys obviously, as you say, you got in touch, you found you had similar interests in the leveling side of things. Perhaps I'll turn to you, Umbra, and say, you know, as a bit of an origin story, what is it about speed leveling that you've always enjoyed, or what drew you to the game of speed leveling?
Yeah, I've been playing, vanilla, since the beginning, 2005 anyway. And then when I got into private servers after leaving retail, I always just naturally played wanting to go as fast as possible, just kind of racing the clock myself. I suppose a lot of other players have had that inclination. But when I was playing private servers, I guess about 2.5 years ago, is when I started, I guess I switched from Horde to Alliance and then started wanting to have a really optimized route and realizing that it's, not much fun as a solo project when you don't have someone to compare against. So that's when I got into taking it more seriously and wanting someone to bounce ideas against and plan more specifics with.
Alenya, at what point, obviously we didn't get the Classic announcement until about 16 months ago. When that was announced, you guys were interested in speed leveling and, probably mucking around as Umbra says on private servers before the announcement. Once the announcement dropped, what was your thinking in terms of what you guys wanted to do?
I'd already been working on the speed running, and to be honest, writing down the guide was in a notebook at that stage. But I think when that announcement came out, I thought, right, I can really do something here with what I've been working on speed running. And it immediately became a focus on just developing something that I felt was going to be super competitive and that would get me out the top of the server very early after actual launch.
Okay, now just to clarify, is this an Alliance guide?
It's very much an Alliance guide, definitely. We don't want to have Horde sort of monopolizing all the fast levelers. Well,
the next question is obviously, now knowing that, was that a choice simply to compete? You knew Joanna's guide was out there for Horde already. Was it like, well, let's offer the other side of, the coin and just do the Alliance because Horde's already been done?
Yeah.
Or is it because you guys just like Alliance more?
Sure, yeah. I guess I would have been on a totally different trajectory if I was really passionate about the Horde side. One of the things that cued me to want to create a guide was that just lack of really good options. And so when I came over to Alliance and wanted to play more seriously on that side, there was no equivalent to Jonah. If there had been, I probably would have, seen less of an opportunity to become more of a hardcore speed leveler and less of a guide maker, that kind of thing.
Now, we'll take you to a point in time where, as I say, you've heard the announcement, Classic's coming. You guys say and you make it sound like obviously a lot of work has been put in between the two of you on this guide that you've now got finished. You've just finished recently. Tell us about the work. How many, just tell us about the disgusting amounts of time and the amount of hours and what you did and the testing to get this guide to where it's at.
I actually thought you might ask this. So I sat down and did a little bit of maths and had.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Awesome. I've just been saying thousands of hours, but I don't know how many.
It is thousands of hours.
Are you serious? Wow.
No, I'm serious. Just on my side, not including Umbra's, I think it was something like about 2,500 hours worth of work so far.
Nice.
Okay, well, let's unpack that 2,500 hours. What was it comprised of? Like, how would you sort of break it down?
It was a bit like that.
Half of it in Darkshore, right? Just kidding.
I'm sure I don't know what you mean, Umbra. Half of it in Darkshore, I'm certain is an exaggeration.
Most passionate Darkshore player I've ever met. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, that's true. Umbra would sort of send me a message and say, what you doing? I'm like, I'm in Darkshore. But I think most of it is actually hands-on, writing the guide and testing it at the same time, which is a very laborious way of doing it, but honestly was probably the main reason why our guide has developed into such a strong and healthy overall design. The amount of time that's taken going from 1 to 20, 1 to 20, 1 to 20, 1 to 40, 1 to 30, 1 to 20, 1 to 40, and then actually working up into the 40s, 50s and 60s has been really substantial. It's been a two-pronged process. The first is to get a handle on the areas and become extremely familiar with everything that's available, and the other half is actually working through it and then just compounding it into an efficient route. Part of that work has also been including looking at the old original vanilla guides and making sure that we're taking advantage of all the quests that are available.
Well, there's a lot to unpackage from what you just said, and what I'm wondering is, you know, what was the most frustrating point and the kind of testing and working out where you go, all right, this area is no good. Surely I can beat that time. Let's try this area now. And, fuck that quest. That was terrible. I've got to get rid of that. Like, surely you were banging your head against the wall many times through the testing, Alenya.
Yeah, I can definitely say when you get to level 55 and you look at the work that you've done and you've realized that there's a much better way to completely reassemble that section and then put it back in 3 levels earlier than where you are. That's generally the most frustrating thing for me, is like having to wipe that run and start a fresh one.
Yeah, building off that a little bit, I think there's lots of we saved ourselves a lot of headaches by having this iterative process where we look at chunks that don't interact with other chunks. And so, like, we don't lose that progress as long as we can put it else in somewhere, like in a different logical place. But anytime that you lose, I don't know, a little route section that you'd love to have played, or when you have to get rid of quests, that's always discouraging. It's like, we want to do more quests and it just doesn't make sense at certain moments. That can be frustrating too.
What's the one area that both of you never want to see again?
I love all of them, but if there was one that I'd happily throw away without missing it, it'd probably be Duskwood.
Duskwood, yeah. That it's not very long in our guide too. We've kind of thankfully cut that one down a bit. I was gonna say Desolace, but I think I'm coming to enjoy Desolace now, although I guess I don't know if I enjoy it in the current way that we have it. But yeah, it feels so empty out there.
Umbra, I'll ask.
Like Desolace would be a good name.
Yeah.
Umbra, I'll ask you, you said that you guys, you found that your guide wasn't taking people through Duskwood for very long. Now, again, I'm not a speed leveling guru or anything, but that sort of grabs me and goes like, that's funny. I thought there would have been a fair bit to do at Duskwood at a certain point. But, what I would ask is, while you're putting this thing together, were there things that you were really surprised by that you thought would be, great streamlined areas to level through or quest through or grind through that didn't turn out to be that way? Or do you think that there's places or things to do that people who read your guide would expect to be there but aren't? Like, what were the biggest surprises?
I mean, Duskwood might be one of them, where there's just so many quests in there, and but managing those quests against how many trips it takes you from the east. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar. The east and western ports of the zone are really separate, and there's a lot going on each side. And then all of that in relation to kind of where you're coming from and where you're going next. I mean, the Alliance side, I feel like more than the Horde, I've done some stuff with Horde as well. More than the Horde is just, there's a mess, a tangle of quests, and when can you versus when should you, and even if you should do it at all. These are all questions that have to get answered. In the case of Duskwood, we used to have a much more robust, complicated route, and we timed it and compared it, and it just ended up being a lot faster to do a much more shorter, streamlined thing and put other time in other spots than Duskwood.
You definitely, you reminded me of something, because obviously I've been playing a little bit lately, but, as people know, I don't really take characters beyond about 30-ish in an effort not to spoil things too much for Classic, and also because of time restrictions. But I'd spent a lot of time in Duskwood lately, and when you talk about that walk through the zone, that east to west, when you've actually got to go from Darkshire, right down to the graveyard on the western side of the zone, I was always like, fuck that. It's one of the more annoying walks in the game. And so I presume other people do this, I don't know, where I would always get the Griffin to Westfall and cross over the river that way. But anyway, just a fun little thing.
I mean, it makes sense sometimes.
Yeah.
And you wish you had twice the Hearthstones. You just want to go out west, Hearth back, go out west, Hearth back, that kind of thing.
100%. Now, Alenya, I'll ask basically, you mentioned that 55 plus sort of moment of grief for you, and a lot of people talk about, the lack of quests in Classic, so to speak, and once you get to level 58, you're probably going to struggle. Did the guide hit a point where it's just like, guess what? No more quests. Go grind for 3 hours. Or did you find that there was a little bit of something to do everywhere?
There's definitely something to do everywhere. I think the main issue with the guide is just making sure that you're being very efficient with the quests that are available. So, for example, we've put in a number of short grinds in various areas along the way for the Alliance side, because it makes more sense to do a grind in some sections in order to be more level appropriate and to be able to actually jam some of those quests together to make it a much better XP per hour in that area. The last run I did, where we are just fine-tuning 55 to 60, I think that I actually still had quests left by the time I hit 60, which was very satisfying.
Our guide has something we're pretty proud of in figuring out that, without giving away too much, that we figured out stuff to do in the 40s to make the 50s run more smoothly. And they are certainly slower, but it's nice to have quests basically throughout the entire 50s with just a couple of those little spots like she mentioned. And so that was a huge relief to me. I was always worried that, there's going to be, you just have to grind from 54 to 55 because there's just nothing streamlined, but it did work out, which is nice.
Now, you guys have put what sounds like a shitload of work into this one. Obviously, you've talked about how many hours you and the two of you have put in as a team. And I'm presuming, tell me if I'm wrong, that this is a guide that's going to be available for purchase at some point soon. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe we're just finishing up the Patreon for it.
Okay, so with that in mind, I mean, I'll let you guys do kind of your sales pitch. We've got Joanna's well-known guide out there, but obviously that's, quite a bit old, I guess you'd say. And, yours is more of a fresh look at, even though it's an old game, it's a fresh look from a different faction and something that could, people could consider instead of Joanna's guide, which is still out there, I think. I mean, I'm not sure actually if you can still buy Joanna's guide, but were someone to look at your guide and they would ask, well, why would I buy this instead of Joanna's guide? Why don't you tell us what the differences might be?
There's actually quite a lot. First of all, Joanna is being quite active, which is fantastic to see. He's actually been doing some work on updating his Horde side guide at the moment, and he certainly made some substantial changes there. I also believe that he is also working to bring out his own Alliance guide before WoW Classic launches, which is also great to see. And I think there's a couple of others that people are working on as well. I think the main difference though is that when it comes to testing on private servers, which is the way everyone's testing at the moment, there's definitely some challenges and some issues that we ran into a couple of years ago that we've actually ironed out since then. And some of those issues are related to the way that P servers are made available in the first place. They're not as much as people think to vanilla. Most people that speedrun are aware, for example, that Quest XP runs from 30 to 60 is being boosted because the private server data is based on a 2.3 Burning Crusade backport. But there's also other things that actually make a substantial change to how you actually play the game and how long it takes you to get through an area. So you're talking about things like mob density. The private servers are heavily overspawned. You're talking about
drop rates.
Drop rates. Dynamic respawns are set. You're talking about mob AI being broken on private servers as compared to how they work on vanilla. So things like interrupt, reactionary spells on timers. There's just heaps, like mob levels.
Mob AI, surprisingly.
Yeah.
Mob AI too, yeah. If they are super smart about casting spells, it just makes areas that might have been super easy or you just sort of flow through it kind of tricky and annoying.
Okay.
And Umbra mentioned before the drop rate issue. Again, I did the maths because I like maths. So on private servers, the epic drop rate is 0.1 on Mangos. The vanilla rate is 0.002. So that's 50 times the drop rate on private servers. Green drop rate's the same. Mangos is 0.54. Vanilla is 0.01. Again, it's 50 times the amount of material being dropped. That has a big influence on how much money you make, how easy it is to progress through the game. Bag drop rates are just off the charts on private servers. They want you to have bags before you leave the start area. It doesn't happen on vanilla. All of those things combine to make a very substantial but subtle difference in how long it takes you to level. Joanna just did a practice horde run. He actually shaved 20 hours off his time, which sounds fantastic, and it is. Full props to him. He's an amazing speedrunner. But I would hazard to say that there is certainly a substantial element of the differences in the way private servers work that has affected his runtime.
Now, I'm
Just
so
quickly.
Go for it, mate.
I guess just a quick add-on to that, on the one hand, it seems like it makes WoW a weird game to speedrun. I think it makes it an interesting one to speedrun just because, I guess once we have a final product in Classic out, we'll see what people can do. Like ours isn't going to be the final guide. That's for sure. If you know how speedrunning works, it is always iteratively progressive, but, it's a weird game to speedrun for all those things that Alenya just mentioned.
I'm so glad that you guys brought all that up, and obviously we're veering now a bit into, with leveling guides comes the, unlocking of perhaps the roadmap to world records. And we all, we talk about Joanna's old world record in such sort of revered tones, and a lot of people know that 4 days, 20 hours mark of slash time played that he hit back in the day, and he's been on the show and talked about that. So if you haven't heard that, please go back and listen to that episode with Joanna. But when we talk about what's to come with Classic, I'm presuming that the two of you are gunning for that world record as well. Would that be fair to say, Alenya?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've got some plans myself.
And now the two of you will be going to head as well, right?
True, but I wouldn't put my chances very well against Alenya. She is a better runner than I. So if I got second, I'd be happy with that.
I've seen Alenya on a server in action in terms of just seeing her level go up over time. And I think she was on cruise control, and a lot of us were still like, holy shit, you are moving. And so I can definitely vouch for the fact that she knows what she's doing and she can get to 60 pretty quickly. But again, as you say, it's, we talk about these private server shenanigans and who knows what it's going to be like in Classic. And it's great that you guys sort of have that frame of mind, that you are aware that maybe things, a spanner might be thrown in the works once Classic drops. So we'll see what happens there. But some stuff has happened in the news lately where as you mentioned, Alenya, Joanna has already shaved a considerable amount of time off of his record, but again, albeit on private servers, he's come down to 3 days, 22 hours with his Troll Hunter, but it's been noted that perhaps even that could be faster because he actually died about 20 times during that run, so he's looking to improve upon that. If I were to push you guys and say, can you think of a time that you're either gunning for or that you think is actually realistic that you'll achieve? I'll start with you, Alenya. What are you really using as a point where you're like, I want to get to 60 in this many hours?
I'm looking at 4 days, and I think that's quite achievable on Classic. I'm well aware that there's quite a number of amazing records on private servers at the moment that are substantially faster, and it's important to note that amongst the speedrunning community, we have some extremely talented and gifted and committed players, so I'll be looking forward to cheering them on amongst their own routes. But the main thing that we did with this guide and that I'm working on for my own run, because you've got to keep in mind this guide and my world record dash are exactly the same thing. You've got to be pretty accurate to vanilla values. As you rightly pointed out, we don't know what's going to happen in terms of how it actually plays out on Classic. We're waiting for the beta to come out so we can adjust accordingly. But I think 4 days will be a pretty solid benchmark for most people when Classic comes out.
Umbra, how about you, mate?
Yeah, I think about it in two different kind of reference frames. One is what I'd like to physically do on launch, and then the other is a slash played time, an honest slash played time that's unassisted to get to 60. And the difference for me there is I don't know if how crazy I am in the first case, like planning out crazy things like sleep schedules and nutrition and like all of the different things you can min-max to try to put your butt in the chair for the 100 hours or so that it takes. But I've got some plans there. On the other frame though, that I'm hoping we can get our guide to be reliably under 4 days. I think it's achievable. And just knowing that like the combination of best segments is low, below 4 days played, is a goal I guess I'm a little bit more immediately interested in, getting that time down. Like if you played optimally on this route, you would get a great slash played time.
And I love the optimism, and obviously you wouldn't be going for it unless you thought you could do it. But as you say, 4 days is an amazing time to shoot for. We'll see what happens there, but it's all friendly, as you say. It's a really, really welcoming speedrunning community. Everyone's great over there. But amongst all the friendliness, I mean, it's fair to say that you guys are, Alenya, you're going for it. And I would dare to say you're backing yourself. You really think you can get it, right? That's why I was so interested to talk to you. Like, you are legit going to be one of the people who, a lot of people might say, oh yeah, I can do it. But I really feel like you're one of the horses that people could back.
Yeah, I committed to this over, 2.5 years now. So, 100%, it's my goal. So that's what I'm working towards. If I get there, that'll be great. If I don't, at least I will be happy to be, up amongst it and having a go. I think that's really the main thing, is to actually just jump on and do your absolute best and chase your goal. So, I am gunning for a personal bet and a server first, and hopefully right up there for the world record as well.
So Umbra mentioned obviously the kinds of outside of game factors that we take into consideration when we talk about speed leveling, and there's things like sleep cycles and nutrition and stuff like that. Alenya, what have you been doing during your practice runs to work on that?
The most important one actually has nothing to do with the game at all, and that is communicating and getting some agreement and commitment from my family. When you're talking about, 100 odd hours of run, and non-stop over a period of days, you're basically stuck at your computer. You're not able to do anything else. So having that cooperation and commitment from the family at home is really important as well.
I don't know what you mean, because I'm a total neckbeard with no family. I'm just kidding.
But I mean, obviously, there will be people with nothing to hold them back. So I mean, everyone has their sort of different advantageous or disadvantages when they talk about how they're going to approach the speed run. Now, you guys, I'm sure. Sorry, go for it, Umbra.
Yeah, just that I like Alenya's perspective on this as a sort of going for a personal best, just an honest personal best, because I think in reality, when Classic launches, it's going to be a bit crazy. Who knows if some duo tag teamed it and traded off, or if some group of mages comes up with an absurdly contrived way of tagging and then, doing some kind of group leveling scheme. I mean, it's the world first 60 is a crazy race. I suppose will be a crazy race. And so I put my money on Alenya first to 60 by honest means. So
I do think it's important to just mention that, people that aren't used to speed running, especially in a game that you're talking about, 100 plus hours to get to 60. The only thing I would say to that is just be a little bit careful about what you're doing as well in terms of exercising and getting up and getting some sleep, because it is quite a physical strain on your body as well. So just make sure you look after yourself there as well.
Standing desk and treadmill.
Yeah. It's some great advice. Now, what are being a part of the speedrunning community, what are some of the crazier times that you guys have seen? Because, I mean, I'm looking at one now and I hear whispers every now and again and again, we do, please don't write me an angry email, because we throw in the caveat that all of this again is private server shenanigans. We understand that. But, you do hear odd times, and I'm looking at one right now where people talk about, there's a 60 run in 3 days, 9 hours. What's some of the craziest stuff that you guys have heard, or some fun stories from testing out with the speedrunning community?
One of the most impressive times I've seen myself, if you class it as a true solo run, unassisted, without using any bugs that are available on private servers. There's a fantastic Alliance side speedrunner called Stoyan, and he actually can do I think just over level 36 in 24 hours, which I think is amazing. Yeah,
I haven't heard that really one. That sounds good.
Yeah, it is. There's a lot of fantastic people out there. You've got duo teams that are working on duo routes. You've got mage teams.
Good luck to them, by the way.
Routes. Yeah. I think it's really exciting, and I'll be 100% rooting for them, because, I mean, the whole point is just to challenge yourself to see just how well you can do it, and there's going to be a lot of different sorts of legitimate world records that are going to come out.
Okay.
Yeah, kind of seeing it as almost as an alternative to raiding in the case of like duo teams or teams of people working together is kind of interesting too. It seems to me that there's a lot of people who have taken a niche approach to leveling. I know a Shaman, for example, who runs really interesting, specific, really nitty-gritty, like down to specific second details for like 1 to 30 on private servers. And so that and all these other ways of doing it, it's just really kind of a cool pastime that adds depth to the game. So.
It's going to be a very, very exciting race. I've got no doubt that it's going to be a lot of fun for all of you, and I wish you nothing but the best when the time comes. And Alenya, I will be absolutely cheering for an Australian to take that crown. So you have nothing but, all of Countdown to Classic support, and the listeners as well. Now, guys, I'll let you finish out on this one. We've talked about your guide that you've obviously put so much work into. And you had a fun little announcement, for some listeners of Countdown to Classic. Is that right, Alenya?
Yeah, that's right. We've offered to give Josh, 5 full 1 to 60 guides to give away to his viewers, however he sees fit. That guide is not currently publicly available because we are still refining it. However, as soon as we launch the completed version before Classic launches, you'll get your hungry little mitts on that.
And here's what I'll say for that one, guys. If you do want a shot at being the lucky winner of one of those 5 guides, which I can't thank the two of you enough for donating those to the show for a free giveaway. I really, really appreciate it. I'll create a separate channel in the Discord, called something like, prize giveaway or something, you'll find it really quick. But join the Countdown to Classic Discord, pop into that channel, and just shoot me a message about why you should be the person that I should give the guide to. And obviously, I'm going to probably award it to people who make me laugh. So get creative and get funny. But I really, really do thank you guys for that. That's really, really nice of you. Umbra, well, let me just sort of say our goodbyes. Is there anything I've left out, guys, that you really want to touch on?
Yeah, well, on the subject of guide giveaways, if people want to take a look at what it's going to be, we actually have we haven't talked about this yet. We're doing an early access where you can get, for like a small, what do you call it on Patreon? It's like, pledge, a small pledge. You can get a, early version of our guide that will show you the layout and how it all is going to look and, give you a sense of what we have in mind. It's all up there on Patreon right now.
Fantastic.
And that's the, 1 to 19, that is.
Yeah.
So 1 to 19 sneak preview, is it?
Yeah.
Yep. And there's a video that kind of explains it as well.
No worries. Well, what we'll do, guys, is we'll put all the links in the show notes to your Patreon. Please, everyone, do go and check it out if you're interested in speed leveling, or if you're just interested in getting a little bit of a helping hand through the leveling process. Obviously, Umbra and Alenya have done some amazing work for you in order to give you the leg up over the competition there. Now, I've just got a couple of quick questions before we leave. We've talked about all of this and just some simple ones that to clear up a bit of confusion on my part. Now, I'm presuming, Alenya, that you're going to be doing all this on a PvE server. Would that be right to say?
I am still undecided, but at the moment, I think the most likely is to be doing a oceanic PvE run.
Okay, fantastic. And just purely out of interest, I know we sort of talked about it before, but over this time that you're running to 60, do you know roughly how much sleep per day you've got planned out?
Yeah, I'll be doing an initial run of about 36 to 40 hours non-stop, and then the 24-hour days after that will be 6 hours rest, and the rest will be.
Very good.
That's my plan, exactly. Wow, great minds think alike. We haven't talked about that before.
Very good. All right, guys. Well, look, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. We'll talk about everything in the meantime of how we can best set you up, and I hope to speak to you again in the future. Alenya, I will give you a call for sure after about a week into launch, after you've dinged 60, and we'll have a chat about how you went.
Whenever that launch may be.
Exactly, whenever that may be. Come on, summer is coming. Summer is coming, everyone. Forget winter, it's summer.
Yeah. I'm a little nervous because I just started a new job and I'm waiting to book the leave, and I've got no doubt.
Yeah,
and I'm a high school teacher, so if it comes in certain weeks of August, I'm screwed. But other than that, we're good to go.
I'm the same. I've got to put in my leave as well. I should be okay for pretty much whenever, but I need an announcement in the next month because I've already got hearings at court are being booked now for June and July, and I'm starting to get nervous going, oh, my June calendar is starting to fill up and July will start to fill up soon. So come on, Blizzard. But, yeah, let's see how we go.
I hear that there's a certain bet being laid whether we get something at a certain event.
There is, yes. I've made a bet with the lovely Patricia, which I mean, you know, when you make a bet just presuming you're going to lose, I really don't expect anything at PAX, but I thought, fuck it. I'm a former gambler. I'll have a fun bet. So, you know, we're going to do something fun there. We'll see how we go. But anyway, guys, look, I'll talk to you later. Stick around on the line, but I'll end the call now. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Now, with all those calls done, it's time for Dramacraft. In Dramacraft, I relay some of the listeners' more dramatic stories about their adventures in Azeroth. And today we begin with this one from MFY, who says this. Way back in the early days of Blackwing Lair, my guild came to hear of a pretty game-breaking exploit on Razorgore that made the encounter a walk in the park. And it was alliance only as it involved a pally. Pretty much the plan was have as many healers as possible with the Soul Stone, quickly kill the 3, I think, orcs at the start, and mind control Razorgore as normal. Then, when the mobs start spawning, have a pally use Divine Intervention on Razorgore, and everyone in the raid dies to the mobs. When this happened, all the mobs despawn, but Razorgore stays there, still D-eyed. The healers use their soul stones and start rezzing everyone, while one person re-mind controls Razorgore and kills all the eggs, without any mobs to have to worry about, etc. Repeat encounter as normal. Well, this obviously riled a few people up, as they considered it cheating and it wasn't how things were meant to be done. Some people refused to be in the raid if it were done like that. Others were all for it, and others, like me, didn't really care either way. We just wanted our fat perps. So, for the first 3 or so weeks, I can't remember exactly, we would try to do the fight the legit way, until we wiped too many times. Then our raid leader would say, fuck it, let's just DI him. Eventually, he either got hotfixed or we got good enough to not need to use the tactic, but nevertheless, it was always a drama-filled time with many vocal voices in Ventrilo, either for or against doing it. Now that's Dramacraft for the week, everyone. So with that, now it's time for some anger with anger management. In anger management, I read you some of the listeners' angriest rants or memories about vanilla World of Warcraft. Now, I used to yell this, but this has got quite a few submissions this week, so I think my voice is going to give out. So I'm just going to say it rather energetically rather than screaming down the microphone. So today we begin with this one from, they've got a few names, Awakune, Lazilu, Altaholic, all of them. They tell us this. And this one seems to be about retail WoW, but you see how it ties into Classic soon. Can we please stop trying to speed run lobby dungeons? I re-rolled a priest and finally got my husband to try WoW, and he's been playing Elemental Shaman. We queued up last night to try our first dungeon together. He's never done one. I've never healed as a priest, and was never much of a healing druid after vanilla. Also, I haven't run these lobby dungeons in a half dozen years. The tank speed pulled the entire dungeon. He almost died at least 20 times, as well as several other members of the group. My husband learned literally nothing about how working as a team in a dungeon works. Nobody said a word to each other, and when I tried to stop to type to ask him to slow down, he was already busy dying around the corner. It's a miracle we made it out alive with no deaths. LFD has totally ruined the excitement of group dynamics. I can't wait for Classic. And the next one comes from regular show contributor Viv, who says this. I'm so sick of hearing people say the design of a game has nothing to do with how people treat each other, or it's the people playing the game that are toxic and changing the game won't fix that, and especially, gamers are just more toxic these days. Well, I agree, people can be jerks and you can't fix that with the design of a game, but you can limit their desire to act upon it. People like to think that they're completely free to make their own decisions. To an extent this is true, but they don't realize the decisions they're making are restricted by the framework of the game. The design of a game does dictate player behavior. In fact, it can do so even more so than real life because it can restrict player choice by completely removing the ability to even do certain things in the game. If a decision isn't an option within the design framework of a game, player behavior is limited and pushed in a certain direction. If you can't use LFG or LFR to instantly form a group and teleport to a dungeon, or instantly replace someone while you're in a dungeon, then you're more invested in keeping everyone happy so that nobody leaves during the run. You're more willing to help people who are failing to get better at their class. Suddenly, their success is tied to your success, much like a business in real life, because the effort required to replace that person is greater than the effort to help them improve in most cases. Flowing on from that, if the only available path to the rewards you want is by cooperating with many people to defeat the boss, and there's no so-called easy way out to accomplish that goal, then you'll want to make more friends and be liked by others on the server. How about if there are no flying mounts in the game and the mobs in the world are stronger? Players become restricted to the ground and are in a more consistently dangerous environment. The point is, every design element in a game nudges people to interact with each other in different ways. The design of an MMO, or any game for that matter, has everything to do with how people interact with each other and what they are and aren't willing to do to progress their character. If your success is directly tied to the success of others by design, you will not be an outright jerk to everyone around you. So are gamers just more toxic these days? I think not. People have been the same for centuries. What changes is the circumstances and environments with which they interact, and that is what dictates their behavior. Okay, there we go. Finished. Hope that wasn't too long, Josh. My bad. It's just been bothering me for a long time. That's all good, Viv. I had to truncate a little bit, but it worked out in the end. Next, we got this one from Minoru, who says this. During the talent revamps, the player base saw that each class was getting their update one patch at a time. Since the Horde vs Alliance rivalry was so intense, people reasonably expected that the Shaman and Paladin talent revamp would happen on the same patch for the sake of maintaining that balance. You can imagine the sheer outrage that came forth when Paladins got their revamp while Shamans were left alone. Surely the next patch would be the Shaman revamp, right? Nope. Priests got their revamp next. To say people were upset was an understatement. Accusations of alliance favoritism were thrown about. Then finally, over 6 months after the Paladin update, the Shamans got their talent revamp in the same patch that the mages did. Why, Blizzard, everyone seems to cry. Are you mocking us? It was surely an interesting time in vanilla WoW history, but it's a part of the vanilla experience that won't be there in Classic. And finally, we've got this one from Taladrill, who tells us this. This is in response to the anger management you read out a while ago about who actually brought you Classic. It's such a nice thought that you kept poor little indie company Blizzard's lights on through the rough times, quote unquote, by keeping your subscription to WoW these past 10 years. Like you think you're funding them through Patreon or something. Give me a break. They had a record $7 billion revenue last year. They don't need your support to decide to release content. Blizzard, just like any other game company, makes content so that people pay them for it. But since you're already paying Blizzard for what they gave you, you are not their target market. They're looking for people who have stopped their subscriptions. The private servers, Nostarius most of all, proved that there is a legitimate market share. If these servers never existed, or if they never got above a few hundred people, then Blizzard never ever would have planned to release Classic. This is far too involved of an undertaking to do it just for fan service, despite what Blizzard PR might say. They believe, and rightfully so, that they will make a profit from this. We, the private server community, proved the passion and interest and proved that it wasn't just a niche interest. Our dedication to the game and the effort of the devs won the company over. With companies, you vote with your wallet, and anyone who keeps a subscription to the current retail game is only telling Blizzard that you want more of the same. If you wanted Classic, the strongest way to have shown that would be to not play the current game and to not give them the subscription money. Now, with that anger out of the way, let's cool it down a notch in memory lane. In Memory Lane, the listeners tell their fondest or funniest memories from their time in the game, and today we start with listener Pilgrim334, who says this. Okay, Josh, I've been a long-time lurker and I figured I'd finally contribute. I have a memory lane and an anger management all rolled into one. Growing up, my best friends and I were Blizzard fanboys, starting off with Diablo 2, Warcraft 3, and eventually World of Warcraft. We both were pretty heavily involved in Warcraft 3 and were anxious for the launch of WoW. I purchased and installed the game about 3 days before my friend, created a Night Elf Hunter, and was completely mesmerized that first time logging into Teldrassil. A few days later, my buddy installs the game. He loads into a different server and creates a Night Elf Hunter. What the fuck? He refused to give up his spot, so I eventually moved to his server and created a druid. I've been wanting to say this for a long time. Josh, you're a selfish asshole. That was the name of my friend, by the way. Next we have this one from listener Aloysius, who tells us this. Hey, I've been listening since the beginning and wanted to share a couple of my earliest memories from WoW. My girlfriend at the time is the one that got me into the game. She already played an Alliance Paladin, so we rolled a couple of dwarves and I was blown away at how big the world and the starting zone was. I remember she had a map on the wall of the zone's Searing Gorge, and I asked her where we were on that map. I sat there in awe because she told me that's just one zone and we're nowhere near that area in the game. She then showed me how the map works, and I probably spent 5 minutes just looking at how big the continent was. She then walked over to the computer, hit the mouse button, and holy shit, there's another continent! We quested through the starting zone and we made the run straight to Ironforge. Again, the game and locations were massive. Our first day was just going through that starting zone. Our second day was just exploring Ironforge. The third day we went out into the world to quests, and I came across this really weird looking thing, a copper vein. I asked what do I do with it, and she told me all about professions. I told her I wanted to be a miner, and we ran back to Ironforge so I could get mining, then ran back and it was still there. A week later I got on the game alone and ran around trying to find mining nodes, and after 2 hours I had a full stack of copper ore, which was capped at 20 in vanilla. I learned how the auction house worked and sold it to make some money. The next day I opened my mailbox because my 20 ore sold and I felt so freaking rich. When my roommate came home I began bragging that I just sold a stack of ore for 40 silver. That's right, less than half a gold made me feel rich. I'm sure I'll think of more cool things to share in the future. Keep doing what you do. Next we got this one from Ren, who tells us this. I used a lot of add-ons back in the day, one of which was called Item Rack. Item Rack allowed you to set specific sets of weapons and armor for you to wear, then swap in and out of those sets at the press of a button, or when specific events occurred. For example, you could set it up to automatically equip all your mount speed enhancing equipment whenever you were on a mount, or auto-equip your tuxedo whenever you were in a main faction city, and so on. I loved that add-on, and created a bunch of different sets for different occasions. Normal combat wear, formal wear, and so on. The most important, however, was my naked set. You heard me right, a set that unequipped everything on me. Granted, I wasn't explicitly stripped to my undies, it only unequipped items that had durability. I still had my cloak and tabard on. It was my panic button whenever I got into a bad situation and thought I was about to die, to save me from taking durability damage. While you couldn't normally change your armor in combat, I was a hunter and could use feign death to get out of combat to take everything off. Because of this, whenever I was in a dungeon or a raid and it looked like we were about to wipe, I'd hit my feign death / naked button macro, saving myself a repair bill. This earned me a reputation of being a hunter who would strip their clothes at the drop of a hat as soon as things looked dicey. Next we have this one from listener Bronson Snob, who tells us this. In 2004, after some major life changes in my 20s, including marriage, divorce, and moving to a new state, I decided to return to university for a fresh start when I was 25 years old. I threw myself into college life and ultimately started dating this much younger guy. When World of Warcraft released that year, he started playing it with all his gaming buddies. Gaming was actually a big part of my life growing up, as my father is a software engineer and developed and tested lots of now old school games back in the 90s and early 2000s, so after a few months of watching him play, I asked him if I could give it a try myself. I had at the time played primarily RTS games, flight simulators, and a lot of FPS games, but had never tried an RPG. He played a human paladin, so I created a human mage on his account, and I believe I got her up to around level 8 and was instantly hooked. I immediately went out and purchased my own copy of the game and took it home and installed it on my badass, at the time, Sony Vaio gaming PC. After deliberating on what type of character I wanted to play, I created a Tauren druid named Hymera on an RP server called Feathermoon, not really understanding at the time that this decision meant we couldn't actually play together. I refused to change my choice of faction and server, as within the first few days of playing I was invited to a Tauren-centric RP guild called Scions of Evenfall, and the people in that guild helped me understand what it is to RP and what sort of skills I should focus on as a druid. I was in love. Needless to say, that relationship didn't last too much longer, and I also ended up failing out of all my college courses. Now, isn't that the true vanilla experience? I still have this character on this server, and she is still to this day my most beloved character among all the alts I've created in the years since. Next we got this one from listener Caposaurus86, who says this: Hey Josh, love your podcast, so I wanted to share my favourite story back in vanilla. Back in the day when we were on an RP PvE server, don't ask me how I got there and why, it was fun anyway, I was the raid lead of a small ZG group. After some time we ended up trying to kill Hakar, and we failed pretty hard. Somehow the coordination to get the Suns there and kill them right on time for the poison thing was too much for us. Frustrated because we were going to wipe again, a member of our group started the only thing you could do in WoW. He started to jump, and for whatever reason he didn't get hit or stunned. I think that's what happened if you get hit with that spell. I don't know, it was too long ago. So I thought, well, let's try this again. We kind of jumped and danced all around, and we really didn't get hit with that spell. We found a bug. But that was at a time when guilds got banned for using bugs in raids. So to be sure we were all doing the right thing, well, maybe because we're all German guys with no humour, I contacted a GM and told him about our bug and asked him if we could use this explicit tactic to kill Hakar. As you could maybe guess, he didn't believe me at all, but he then told me that he wanted to watch and asked when our next raid would be. Well, long story short, I got myself a stopwatch because either I was a fucking casual noob or DBM wasn't working right at that time with the spell timers, I don't know anymore. And 5 seconds before Hakar was going to cast Blood Siphon, I screamed, "Jump, jump, jump!" and no one was hit. In the end, we killed Hakar for the first time. And the GM couldn't stop spamming, ha 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 ha. I so wish I still had screenshots of this. Well, he reported the bug, but said that we could use this to literally dance that boss to death. He just told us not to spread this on the forums and stuff, but yeah, that was one of my funny stories that I'll never forget. Thanks for the podcast. Next we got this one from listener Locke, who tells us this. Way back in 05, I finally managed to hit 60 on my hunter. That week I was in my first MC, the joy of being in a guild who just had 40 active members. This was early raiding for this guild, and the loot system was a bit antiquated. The premise of the system was simple. When you wanted loot, you would /roll 1 to 100, highest number wins. But for each boss you didn't get loot on, or maybe it was 2 bosses, it's hard to remember, you'd be able to increase your roll by 10. Winning a loot would reset your roll back to 1 to 100. So if you didn't get loot from 5 or maybe 10 bosses, you would be able to roll 50 to 150, thus increasing your chance at loot, while also maintaining a random element. The max roll you can get was set to 90 to 190. This was until I appeared. In about my third run through MC, the following occurs. We down Lucifron and Magmadar with little effort. The guild had been clearing the early parts of MC regularly at this point, with only Domo and Rag to go. I managed to get myself the Hunter Shoulders from Harbinger at the end of the previous run. The Giant Stalker gloves dropped from Gehenna. I /roll against 3 other hunters, all of whom had 50 plus modifiers on their rolls, and I win with a solid 90 something. A few boss kills later, and the Giant Stalker helm drops. I win again. Giant Stalker braces from some trash near the end? Me too. At this point, the other hunters are getting pretty peeved while I'm loving my super fast upgrades from my Beast Stalker set. The next day we hit Onyxia's lair. Kill the mighty beast, and would you look at that, Dragon Stalker's helm drops. That's obviously an upgrade over the Giant Stalkers I got the night before. We roll, and guess who wins? Why, me of course. At this point, all hell breaks loose, as the other hunters had had enough. Thankfully directed more at the GM and not my young loot hoarding self. After some discussion, I sadly did not get the helm. I was robbed! And that's the story of why my guild started to use DKP from that point on. And that's Memory Lane for the week, everyone. I've got so many more of those banked up, so if you haven't heard yours read yet, I promise one day I will get to it. But that's it pretty much for the show, so I just want to let you all know that I've got a lot of calls that I'm sitting on too. Again, if you haven't heard yours yet, I promise it will come one day. I've developed a really bad habit where I just keep on calling people, and so the show's stores of calls aren't really going down. I'll have to see how I address this going forward, but it's a great problem to have as it's turning the show into what I'd always wanted it to be. Classic WoW talkback radio. The dream that I'd always envisioned for the show from the outset is slowly coming together, and I can't be more thankful, and it's all thanks to all of you who listen and call into the show. But tune in next week for more Kevin Jordan, more calls, and more countdown. Before we go, let's go through some thank yous, and a big thank you as always to patrons: AeroPC, Ante, Binga, Brandon K, Cascade, Connor C, Damien A, Dave K, David F, Eric L, Herbert, James S, Jamie S, Jeff J, John HC, Josh W, Minoru, Randall H, Rarebit, Rick S, Ryan K, Schmige, Sylvia K, Tim B, Tim S, Torbjorn C, Voikora, and Zudamos. And of course, the very dedicated patrons of Countdown to Classic. An extra special shout out and thank you from the bottom of my heart to Alice R, Billy C, Eric S, Firespit Kitten, Flosy B, Batlord, Carl W, Nick B, Palfurus, Romani, Tsunami, The Anton, Wilson Ma, and Velarco. Thank you so much for your phenomenal support of the show. Countdown to Classic would not be here doing this without your support. So that's it for today, everyone. Have a great rest of the week, and I'll see you all next time.